And good morning, everybody. Now, this is one of those things I really have been looking forward to. Michael Shrimpton, Joseph P. Farrell, and Joseph P. Farrell's puppy dog. Yes.
I don't
Shiloh.
have a dog. I don't have a dog, I'm afraid.
You strike me as a cat person.
I'm not allowed pets. I live in a. I rent, and I'm not allowed. I don't earn enough money to own my own home. Not anymore.
Well, you live in the British Empire, who has taken over so
I live
much.
in the British Empire.
Doesn't have to have a cat. It's going well in England. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you guys is because you are far, far smarter than I, which is not hard. And
well, you're pretty smart, but
I read books. One thing I think we need to. One of the reasons why I wanted to talk about Roswell, about Kennedy, about 9/11, about World War I, World War II, is because what we're seeing today that's going on in the world is just a repetition of what has always happened. And with the complete neglect of history or rewrite of it outright, people don't really understand what they're seeing, what they're being exposed to. And I just want to start this. We're drawing a link through one of these events, because if you look at world events or assassinations or wars individually, yes, theoretically, it's possible that one madman can take over one country, start a war with another, and one person gets assassinated. These things happen even by a lunatic individually. But if we go back to before the German unification of before the Franco-Prussian War, just to take one company out of example and see how this who's actually pulling the strings, you can say, well, the same person, the company, for instance, Krupp, for instance, gave weapons to both sides of the Franco-Prussian War, and the Franco-Prussian War had a lot of new innovations, weapons, testings that led us straight back to World War I. Who funded World War I? Who was actually behind this? This was a war that could have been avoided, and who delivered weapons to everybody? Fast forward through who funded the Nazis? Who put them in charge? The Nazis, to me, is not an entity that grew up on its own. They were spawned by interests, just like the communists, like the Marxists. All of the world events, we look behind it all. We look at the books on the wars and the tanks and the planes, but why are these things happening? These things are happening by the same companies. You go, then you take the same businesses that put the Nazis in business. You fast forward to World War II. The same businesses and companies are in charge. At the end of World War II, the same businesses, the same companies, the same entities turns into their intelligence friends. They continue the business. And we have a string of wars that people makes money on. We go through Kennedy. We go through technology that crashed at Roswell. We go through all the way up to 9/11. And there's linkage between the Franco-Prussian War's arms manufacturers all the way up to 9/11. Believe it or not, there's a line that no one sees. There are people who are in charge, the entities that are running things that no one will ever know their names. And as we can clearly see today, where everyone is running around frustrated at world events that they are not in charge of, regardless who they vote for, is because the people they vote for are not really in charge. You look behind the mirror. Who is really in charge? And that's an open and loaded question. But nothing happens from nothing. And it's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rule. And the politicians don't really have the gold. And correct. I think, isn't it just millions of people paid for that knowledge of World War I and World War II. Kennedy paid for it with his life. So how do we get from these people running technologies or intelligence and money and power from World War I to World War II, all of a sudden to Roswell?
Yes. Are you looking to me or to Joseph?
Yes.
Joseph,
I think the intention is we just jump in there.
I think I'm gonna. Let's think. Joseph, you have. I love your take on Roswell, because you pissed off all the ufologists, and I'm so
yes.
No more foil.
I do too. I'm not. I don't believe in UFOs as such. I believe in unidentified flying objects, and I tried to place an identification on them, but I don't believe in the extraterrestrial origin theory.
Well, I have an open mind about the extraterrestrial origin theory, but my problem is no one has yet convinced me that the physics that they see in the UFO is sophisticated enough to be interplanetary or interstellar. And
Yes.
Roswell is right at the top of the list as far as I'm concerned of misidentification.
Yes.
But let me go back and address the assassination thing, Tino.
That would be going cold.
Well, because I got that question a lot. You know, I used to be a history professor in a local college where I live, and that was way before this career in writing strange books. but
I've got some of Joe's books here,
and they are truly strange. I mean, there's just
no more foil hats for you.
No more foil hats for me. But no, I would get this question a lot, and I would always, you know, it was so frustrating to try and teach some useful information about the beginning of World War I. Because, of course, we have Archduke Franz Ferdinand von Habsburg driving with his wife through Sarajevo, and bang, a mad Serbian shoots the guy and his wife, and World War I.
Yeah, well, that was a put up job. I mean,
well, of course it was. You know?
Yeah, of course it was. The driver stopped. I mean, he's paid 30,000 crowns or whatever.
Yes,
it was.
exactly. You know, and this is my point. You know, the way the history books put it. Well, Gavrilo Princip, and so what I had to do was get a hold of the Austro-Hungarian trial transcripts of all of those members of that assassination team and have my students read it. And what it showed them was, okay, this was not just a happenstance thing. There was planning involved. The Serbian intelligence was involved. The Austro-Hungarian intelligence was spying on the Serbian intelligence. The Russians were involved. You know, and squatting in the middle of this mess is poor Kaiser Wilhelm.
Well, Kaiser Bill,
Kaiser Bill and Chancellor Bettman Holweg, who's as crooked as a dog's hind leg.
Yeah, he was worse than Schultz.
Oh, he was horrible.
Yeah, I know. But the idea that the driver of the Archduke and Archduchess accidentally stopped outside the cafe.
He got lost, didn't he?
Where have we heard that before?
Yeah, I know. It's isn't it? There's a Serbian nationalist who's gay. So we've got a gay Serbian nationalist who's being blackmailed by Serbian intelligence.
Yeah.
Who in turn have been penetrated by the Austro-Hungarian intelligence.
Right.
And in fact, one of them was, I think, the head of Serbia. I think one was executed for treason. So we got a bloke who's executed for treason, blackmailing this gay Serbian nationalist into having a potshot at the Archduke and Archduchess.
Who's not terribly popular in the family.
The driver stops the limo right outside the cafe where he's waiting with his Luger, which then turns up at a Jesuit monastery about 80 or 90 years later.
Really?
Yeah, he was a Jesuit. I mean, the Jesuits were closely involved with German intelligence, and the Jesuits.
Oh, is there a grassy knoll around there?
Yeah, is there a
got
tree,
everything except a grassy knoll?
Yeah, is there a tree blocking the aim of Princip in between?
No, Princip had a clear shot at both the prince and the princess. Sorry, at the Archduke and the Archduchess. I don't think, in fact, he wanted to kill the Archduchess, but he did. It's one of the problems when you take pot shots at your target. You sometimes hit the person sitting next to them as well. His hand was probably shaking quite a bit.
Connolly.
Mike Connolly. Yeah,
Connolly,
exactly. So, that whole thing was a put-up job. The Germans knew all about it. Of course they did. They wanted to start a world war, and this was their pretext.
I think if you look at it carefully enough, everybody wanted to start a world war.
Oh, no, we didn't. We were British. We're the good guys. We didn't.
Oh. Yeah, there was absolutely nothing wrong with Edward VII or any of those.
No, of course not. He was a lovely old king. He was a good king, Edward VII.
Yeah, he was.
He wanted peace. I mean,
he was a jolly good bloke.
He was a jolly good bloke. Shagged left, right, and centre, but he wanted peace. One of his mistresses, by the way, was the grandmother or great grandmother of the Queen. Alice Keppel was one of his mistresses, and I'd have to look it up. I think she was either the great grandmother. I think she's the grandmother of our new Queen. Small historical tidbit.
Well, the point here being, folks, is you can find all sorts of parallels between.
Yeah, well, it's like the Ford Lincoln thing, isn't it? Yes,
Yes,
Lincoln was shot in the
exactly.
Ford, and Lincoln was shot in the Ford Theater, and President Kennedy was shot in a Lincoln. Yeah,
both in the head.
Both set up by the same intelligence agency,
and they both wanted to change things,
change names, change locations. But there's a continuity of German intelligence all the way through from the Franco-Prussian, the unification of Germany, all the way through the Franco-Prussian War, the American Civil War, all the way through to the Kennedy assassination, and the present day.
See, that's what there is. There's the continuity of the government behind the government.
Yeah.
The governments may change.
Yeah, well, it's not the government, it's the intelligence agencies behind the government.
Intelligence.
Yeah.
Germany,
and they've always been in business with big business.
Yeah. Germany is an intelligence state. The Nazis were installed. The Nazis didn't just bully their way into power. You can't bully your way into power. I mean, you can't just go down the street, knock over a few communists, and shoot up a few Jews, and and bang up the odd gypsy. You can't just bully your way into power in Germany. It's a fairly sophisticated country.
You can do it in Russia. Stalin did quite well at that.
Well, Stalin was a German agent. So Stalin was installed by German intelligence, which is why he didn't think Hitler was going to invade.
And where did Marx write all his silly nonsense?
Well, exactly, in England. And Marx was an asset of German intelligence. Well, he was an asset of Prussian intelligence.
And how did Lenin manage to get his way over to stop World War I?
Well, the Germans arranged it. He traveled to Russia via Germany.
While at the same time, the Americans made sure that...
Well, let's remember, it was Max Warburg who was the advisor to the Kaiser, and his brother Paul just happens to be conveniently at the time the governor of the New York Federal Reserve Bank.
Yeah.
Coincidence.
So it's all pure coincidence, of course.
No, it isn't. No, it isn't.
Things happened all the time.
Well, that's why the Titanic was sunk. The Germans sank the Titanic to get rid of the financiers who were opposed to setting up the Federal Reserve. And the Federal Reserve,
I think you mean the Olympic was sunk, but
oh no, where's the Titanic? That I tell you where that theory came from. The newspapers in 1912 were no more sophisticated than they are now. There were very few photographs of the Titanic. She was brand new. It was a maiden voyage.
Yeah, they had Harlow and Wolff.
Well, exactly. The problem was that newspapers printed photos of the Olympic and said, this is the Titanic. Yeah. You can imagine that editors then were no more sophisticated than they are now. The New York Times says, well, we don't have a photo of the Titanic. We'll stick one into the Olympic and we'll call it the Titanic. And, the New York Times editorial standards haven't changed in 110 years. So researchers are looking at the whole bunch of photos and saying, well, hang on a minute. That's not the Titanic. That's the Olympic. So they're thinking that the ship that sailed from Southampton was the ship that's photographed, it appears in the New York Times or whatever, sailing from Southampton. They're all saying, oh, well, that's the Olympic, not the Titanic. Therefore, this is an insurance job. No. The ship that sailed from Southampton was definitely the Titanic. But because of the shortage of Titanic photos, newspapers all around the world stuck in photos of the Olympic. There were slight differences. The Titanic had closed-in promenade.
Had a closed-in promenade.
Exactly. Right. So you can tell the difference. Someone who knows what they're doing can tell the difference between the two ships. But there's no doubt the ship that sailed from Southampton was the Titanic.
Well, I didn't mean to get us off on that.
The Olympic was rammed. Now, I've expressed.
Oh yes, it was.
In my book Spy Hunter, I've said it's not entirely a coincidence that the Titanic sister ship, as the Germans are planning to kill off the industrialists, they kill off the financiers on the Titanic. So they're funneling all the key opponents of the Federal Reserve are suddenly put on this one ship. Somebody, naval intelligence should have smelt a rat, but of course, naval intelligence had penetrated by the Germans. Somebody should have smelled a rat and said, hang on a minute, there are too many key people on the same ship at the same time. This ship is going to be sunk. It's a bit like, it was one of the reasons why I realized the nuclear bomb threat to the Olympics was real, because every member of the royal family, head of the Duke of York, in the line of succession, was in the same place at the same time. And I said, whoa, we don't allow that. That's total breach of protocol. You don't send the entire royal family ahead of the Duke of York in the line of succession. You don't send everybody in the line of succession, not just the Queen, but Prince Charles, Prince William, Prince Harry. You don't send everybody to the same event, and guaranteed, if everybody's being invited to the same event, someone's going to blow up the stadium.
You mean it sounds a little bit like all those documents that seem to all been placed at now what was that, building 7, the one that came down 20 minutes after the BBC said it did.
I'm sorry, I have some books on the Titanic, and I was just looking at my bookshelf. I turned away from the camera to see if I had a book. I didn't realize the Titanic was going to come up. Well, I bought it up. So.
I didn't realize the Titanic. And if only it did.
I'll blame Joseph. I do have some photos that just to show reviewers the differences between the Olympic and the Titanic. They are quite small. Incidentally, because they were sister ships, we used, when I was researching with Captain Boxall, a good merchant mariner, who told me, incidentally, that the rumors in the merchant marine for ever after the sinking of the Titanic, decades, it was discussed in wardrooms when people were at sea, and everybody thought the whole thing was a phony, that there was some major problem with it. And one of the problems with it is that the lookouts, Fleet and his colleague, spotted the iceberg in time for the Titanic to have done a viewing and headed back to Southampton. And we worked out the turning circle calculations for Titanic were based on that of the Olympic. There were no turning circle calculations for the Titanic, but the Olympic was her sister ship. You could argue a half sister, but the changes were actually, Joseph's right, the promenade deck was boarded in, but the changes between the Olympic and the Titanic were minor.
Very small.
Now, the ramming of the Olympic was very interesting, because the captain normally, as I said in my book, which is that's my book, Spy Hunter, which is if somebody wants to email me, I can sell you a copy in the United States. My publishers won't ship it, but the publishers are now sending me small stock of books that I can ship to the States for a very reasonable £55, including postage and packaging. Well, don't blame me. The book is heavy. I mean, it's a weighty tome. It's a weighty tome academically, but it also weighs over £2. So the postage is nearly 30 quid. It was ludicrous.
Still not going digital.
Oh, we tried the digital book and nobody bought it. That was a waste. I thought the digital book would go down very well in the States. Nobody wanted it in Kindle. Literally, I mean, we sold 2 a year or something. It was not worth the fee. It just wasn't economic proposition. But as I explained in my book, we've done the turning circle calculations on the Titanic based on the Olympic, and worked out. I said she could have done a UE and headed right back to Southampton.
So basically what we can learn, if we look at world, like I said, at world events, everything, if you look at it individually, I guess there might not be anything to see here. But the tactics are always the same. Assets disappear, people disappear, and there's always question marks.
Yeah, it looks as though we set up the ramming of the Olympic. Normally, as I lost the thread of my thought there, normally, if you're the captain of a Royal Navy warship and you ram, you've got a bloody great ram at the front of your warship, which most cruisers by 1912, or 1911, cruisers, we got out of the business of ramming. It all went back to the Battle of Lissa.
I'm sorry, the American Navy's been bringing it back in the China Sea. Sorry.
The Chinese. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Don't go there, Tino.
I'm sorry. There's a tanker over there.
No, I have my suspicions about all these rammings and accidents that have been going on.
Oh, rammings are usually planned. We go all the way back to the Battle of Lissa, and one dreadnought rammed. This was the battle between the Italians and the Austro-Hungarians.
Yes.
One dreadnought, well, pre-dreadnought, obviously, 1866, was it not? One battleship rams another, but I don't think that was actually ever planned. I think it was an accidental ramming. There was a lot of confusion. Ranges were short. Visibility was pretty bad. And sorry, we've got a question. No,
it's just you need to refresh your Harvard site and the right picture. Apparently, I think if I didn't tell you now, I'd forget.
No, I didn't. I'm not sure I know how to do. I didn't know I had a Harvard site. Thank you for telling me. Anyway. Anyway, coming back to the Olympic. So the Battle of Lissa, a ship is sunk by ramming. Everybody then thinks it's deliberate. Some naval historians would query whether it was or it wasn't. But anyway, one ship gets sunk in one battle by ramming, and then rams became very popular. I mean, they disappeared basically with the Romans and triremes, and then all of a sudden, ramming is now the big thing. So a whole bunch of ships are built in the last quarter of the 19th century with bloody great rams at the front.
Yes.
And HMS Hawke was one of these ancient cruisers that had a great big ram at the front. Now, two things about rams. One, if your ship is equipped with a ram, you have to be extra careful about where you stick it, as it were. And without being exactly. If you've got a great big weapon, you're sticking out the front of your cruiser, you've got to be a bit careful about where you put it. And secondly, by 1911, they were very rare. Hawke was one of the last ships in the Royal Navy equipped with a ram. And then all of a sudden, one of the few remaining ships in the Royal Navy with a ram rams the Olympic in harbour where nobody was likely to die. And it looks as though someone in naval intelligence had picked up on the plan to sink the Titanic, and it was a warning shot to the Germans. Now, one of the reasons I think that is that the captain of HMS Hawke, his career didn't suffer. And Joseph, normally, if you're on a cruiser equipped with a ram and you go and ram the world's largest passenger liner in Southampton Harbour, normally your career would suffer. I mean, trust me, it's just not the sort of thing that a career-minded naval officer would want to do. I mean, nobody's going to get up in the morning and think, what do I need to do today to advance my career? I know, I'll go and ram the RMS Olympic. See if I can sink a 48,000 ton ship.
They'll know my name tomorrow.
And the ramming was clearly deliberate. And equally clearly, somebody had okayed the ramming because the captain was let off with a reprimand. His career didn't suffer at all. And then the Germans, pissed off at this, then went out of their way to U-boat to sink HMS Hawke. She was sunk, I think, in 1914 or 1915. But the Germans specifically target the Hawke and sink her. It looks to me as though German naval intelligence were a bit annoyed with the whole Olympic episode. Anyway.
Before we get back to the delightful Nazi aliens, I know Joseph, I know you. You're just sitting there. You wanna share your ramming theory. I can tell.
I don't have any theory about the ramming.
The current day one, the one in the China Sea.
That one. China Sea. Yeah.
Yes, the oopsie-daisy. There's a Chinese tanker ship down there.
I've heard all sorts of nonsense. I have a friend of mine who's a retired U.S. Navy lieutenant commander. So, he's trying to tell me, well, it's because of the lack of training and so on and so forth. And believe it or not, I can actually believe the lack of training. And the reason why is, as I said, I was a college professor and I saw the stupidity coming out of the American school system. It is,
yes,
it's off the charts, breathtakingly bad.
Yes.
Okay.
But you're not alone in that. I mean, our schools are pretty poor as well.
Well, but
just look at the cabinet. I mean, they were all schooled in Britain, and there's hardly anyone with a brain between them.
Listen, when it when it comes to instupidation, I will put the American cabinet up against the British cabinet any day of the week.
Well, yeah, they're not stupid.
The coefficient of stupidity over here has got you all beat.
No, yeah, in fairness,
the Germans are trailing. The Germans are trailing.
Yeah, the American, Biden's cabinet is sillier than
it's pretty bad. But anyway, the ramming theory.
It's the white members of the cabinet that let the side down. I mean, Swella Braverman and Kemi Badenoch. Swella is Asian, Kemi is African. They're very smart. They are the only two people in the cabinet with a brain. The white men let the side down. I mean, how they managed to get such a bunch of silly white men, I don't know. I mean,
look at the Germans; they're doing wonderful.
Please, do we have to?
No, we don't. But continue on the naval thought.
Well, no, it's only German politicians that are stupid. The German intelligence are not stupid. I wish they were.
The problem
they're having, evil, but they're not stupid.
The problem I'm having with what we've been told, and I go back to the USS John Fitzgerald incident off of Japan. So we're supposed to believe that an Arleigh Burke class frigate, which is America's most sophisticated shipborne phased array radar system, is magically going to be rammed by some sort of cargo ship in one of the busiest sea lanes in Japan, and that this is not intentional. And here's my problem, Tino. If you examine the statements of the crews of both ships, they make no sense. It's as if they were manipulated somehow, and I really don't put it past somebody using a mind manipulation technology like the Havana syndrome.
I know about mind manipulation, but certainly pressure might have.
Well, something was involved there.
I mean, in the Titanic, the entire surviving crew were got together in a warehouse in Southampton and told by naval
and told not to talk.
You cannot talk about the sinking.
Yeah, well, this is my problem with the Fitzgerald incident. It's my problem with the repeat of the incident down in the Straits of Malacca a few months later, and for that matter, let's go all the way back to the USS Cole, when we had a Russian Sukhoi, 22 fighter bomber that flew over an Arleigh Burke class destroyer and simply turned off the electronics and gone.
And so, now I hadn't heard of the
that's a big
radar.
Yeah, that's a big and it had to beat a hasty retreat to Constanța, Romania, before the Navy would even let anything about that incident out. But that happened, and it happened again to the same ship in the Baltic Sea with another Russian Sukhoi 22 fighter. So in other words,
Chinese copy.
Russian. So in other words, the Russians have turned off our phased array radars twice in a few years. And on top of this, we have these collisions. So no, I don't think the ramming incidents, Tino, are accidents at all. I think there's a technology involved. I don't know what the technology it is. It might be mind manipulation. It might be that they have a means of hacking into the ships and steering the remote. It could be any number of things.
I was thinking some sort of electronic countermeasure as well.
Playing around, possible playing around with the radar. I agree with Joseph. The ramming incidents of U.S. warships anywhere near China, I think there have been two, haven't there? Yeah. They do not look remotely genuine. No. They are clearly not accidental. No. It's a bit like there's a big freighter went ashore on a reef off New Zealand when the Chinese are applying pressure to
it's like that freighter that grounded itself in the Suez Canal.
Well, that's another dot. That looks very
of course it is, because you have to have a harbor pilot get on the freighter and steer it through the canal.
Yeah. Yes, ships have things called pilots. When I've been on the I actually think the standard of seamanship in the American Navy is quite high. I've been on a U.S. warship at sea. As everybody knows, I flew out to Enterprise, and so I've actually been on the bridge of a U.S. warship. at sea, and I found the standard of watchkeeping very high, and the radar is excellent. I mean, and the radar on Enterprise was not state of the art. A radar on an Aegis destroyer is more powerful. The SPY-1 radar has a good radar system.
Yeah.
It's interesting when it came up with the whole Ukrainian mess that another wonderful, delightful accident that happened because of one madman. And they started talking about how the Russians were losing their warships because they're old, they're obsolete, they had this old technology, and by comparison, you have Allied warships, you have all this.
Tino,
technology.
haven't you been watching the news? The Ukrainians are mopping the floor with the Russians. They're just winning right and left.
That's funny. The last thing I heard from my Polish special forces friend was that Ukrainian missiles were landing in Poland.
Correct. One landed in Poland last night.
That's right.
A Russian missile. It wasn't a Russian missile. It bloody well wasn't. It was a Ukrainian missile.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing from the ground as well. That's not going to get us into a war with the Russians. Now, is it that kind of talk?
Ukrainian, it looks like a false flag. It's not even clear the Ukrainians are now saying, "Oh well, we were firing at a Russian missile, and our missile went off course." I'm not buying that at all. It's not clear that it was actually a Russian missile at all.
No, that's what I'm hearing.
Looks to me like the Ukrainians decided, look, we need to bring NATO into this war. We're losing. Despite what we may have taken Kherson, but that was a strategic, that kind of looked like the Russians withdrawing because of the logistic problems caused by the destruction of the damage to the bridge. So there's a bridge across
it worked for the Gulf of Tonkin, so why not try it again?
Why not try it again?
I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I don't have a problem with the US going to war. I mean, they should have declared it. But I don't have a problem with the first of the Tonkin Gulf incidents. There are two. Well, not all viewers will know, because this was a long time ago now. Joseph and I were young when so long ago. Joseph and I were young when the Tonkin Gulf happened. I nearly ended up in Vietnam, as a matter of it. It was a small point, because I was then living in Australia. My father was an RAF fighter pilot. He retired, and we went out what we would call 10-pound bombs. We went out on subsidized tickets to Australia. 36 hours in a Qantas Boeing 707. I still remember that. And we flew via New York. First time I went to America. We landed New York, then San Francisco, then Honolulu, and then Fiji, and then Sydney. And there I wasn't that far away from being called up, or at least the age to be called up, when the Chinese agent Gough Whitlam won the 72 election in Australia. The Labour Party came in, and they abolished conscription and wanted to help the commies out. So they pulled Australia out of Vietnam. So I was 16 when conscription ended. Another 18 months, probably, I would have been called up, and I would have been happy to go, but I would have gone. I was hoping to get into the Royal Australian Air Force. Flying was my father's. I got into the RAF in the University Air Squadron. A few years later, I would have volunteered for the RAF. I wouldn't have waited to be called up. I'd have said, I want to fly. I didn't particularly fancy getting my leg blown off by a landmine in the jungle. That seemed to be a bit irritating.
It does. Yes,
having the leg blown off can be a bit irritating. So I thought flying looks a bit more civilized to me, air-conditioned comfort, So I think flying over the jungle sounds a lot preferable to sort of hacking through the jungle with a big backpack on your back. But anyway, so I was in Australia at the time, and the Tonkin Gulf incident, the first Tonkin Gulf incident happened. A couple of North Vietnamese torpedo boats tried to sink the USS Maddox, which is working for the National Security Agency, because there's a container on the back where the NSA guys are doing the monitoring North Vietnamese communications, which is fair enough. They were in international waters. So the first attack happened. The second attack didn't. Everybody's expecting an attack. So, the torpedoes that were allegedly fired on the second occasion just didn't happen. There were no torpedoes. The North Vietnamese weren't going anywhere near the Americans. But everybody got into a panic, and somebody said torpedoes, and it was probably a school of flying fish. But the first one did happen. That was the North Vietnamese were not entitled to attack the USS Turner. Or the Maddox, or neither the Turner Joy nor the Maddox should have been attacked. What the hell was going down there, I don't know, because the North Vietnamese didn't want to bring the Americans into a full-scale war. Whether Ho Chi Minh had actually sanctioned this or not, I don't know. I still have an open mind on that. I don't know what, Joseph, your views on that are.
My views can be summarized in 2 words, to quote President Biden, Joe. And the 3 words are Lyndon Baines Johnson was what was going down in the Gulf of Tonkin.
3 words, yes. Lyndon Baines
3
Johnson.
words. 2 words. 2 words if you're using the Biden counting.
2 words using the Joe Biden method of counting, yes. Yes, Lyndon Baines Johnson, the man who was involved in the Kennedy assassination.
Yes.
The man whose office screwed up the time zones and rang the federal judge half an hour before the assassination.
Whoops.
Get down to love. Now, Joseph, you might be interested to know the CIA man, the guy in the CIA who checked the phone records out of the Naval Observatory and found out that the federal judge had been alerted to get down to Love Field before the shooting, later became a client of mine.
Later what?
He became a client. He was a CIA guy. Oh, yes. Yeah.
Well,
yeah. I mean, he'd flown a U-2 over Cuba. Serious individual. He'd flown a U-2 over the Soviet Union. He'd flown a U-2. Hell, he did more hours in the Soviet Union than most Soviet fighter pilots. He was flying out of Peshawar in Pakistan and U-2s up to Bodo in Norway.
Yeah.
Was he the intelligence agent that showed his ID to get out of the books repository after the assassination? Was he the one that got?
He wasn't. He went down to Dallas after the assassination and he headed up the CIA investigation and discovered the whole thing was a phony. And he's the guy who handed in the clip to the Warren administration because the CIA boys, somebody in Langley went, oh, shit, if I'm allowed to use that expression. We're after the watershed in England, but probably not before it in America. Somebody in Langley goes, oh, shit, the rifle hasn't got a clip.
That's right.
My friend, who is Joe, I won't give his surname, but his first name is Joe, great man. I don't think he's any longer with us. Bush, there was a nasty piece of work called Bush 41. Joseph, you'll have heard of Bush 41. Unfortunately, when I was arrested, Joe was ordered to break off contact with me and supply a silly statement to the prosecution, which he did, although he didn't want to. But Bush 41 had his way of leaning on people. Like, if you don't do this, I'll have you shot. And let's face it, Bush 41 was also involved in the Kennedy assassination and was whacking people off oil rigs owned by Zapata Corporation, island rather than oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. But Bush 41, we all know about Bush 41. So
over
Joe,
here we refer to him as King George, but continue.
Yeah, exactly. So Joe rolls up to the Warren Commission and says, oh, by the way, here's the clip. Now, you can partly verify this by looking at the exhibit numbers. The exhibit number for the clip, which I've given, it's in my book. The exhibit number for the book, I remember looking at it. Joe said, look, they gave it an exhibit number, but not sort of exhibit 31A. It was an exhibit number in the right place. And I looked up the list, and sure enough, the clip is way down. The rifle's up there. The clip is down there. There's a gap of several hundred exhibits between the rifle and the clip.
Let me just
rules out Oswald virtually, absolutely on that single piece of intelligence rules out Oswald as a shooter or the shooter, because without a clip, 3 rounds in 8 seconds, just not possible.
Yes, there's bullet holes all over Dallas after this. Let me just break down the rifle for a second.
There were more shooters in Dallas than there were at the OK Corral. I mean, the whole thing was
everywhere on that day. One thing that's interesting about the rifle,
everybody was in Dealey Plaza except for Doc Holliday.
Are you sure?
Well, he might have been. Bush 41 was there.
Where was Gabriela Princik at that point? But anyway,
there was a very dodgy CBS. Dan Rather was there as well.
Dan Rather, yeah.
Dan Rather, yeah. There were all sorts of very strange people. I not Dan Rather's not strange. He's just
now. Let me just break down a little bit about this rifle, because there's a whole lot of things before we get into it, and that's the rifle is interesting, because it was kind of a lot of rifles. And the Carcano was part of a consignment of about 900,000 Carcanos that had been returned in all different configurations to the Italian factory. That was then eventually purchased by an American company to be refurbished by an Italian gunsmith and have all the insignias taken off, which was done to about 150,000 Carcanos, had their numbers filed off and stamped made in Italy, and was shortened or lengthened depending on what the American market wanted. They came over from late 50s to 1962, were some 150,000 Carcanos that came over here after having been refurbished and had their numbers removed. Short of one consignment, about 5,000 of them that was held up for almost 18 months in the harbor in New York. That's the only shipment. There's 12. I think 12 shipments went out of Carcanos from Italy to here that had been refurbished, had their numbers removed, had been cleaned up.
Are you saying that my theory was for the different barrel lengths, as Joseph knows, the gun that in that phony photo of Lee Harvey Oswald allegedly holding a Mannlicher-Carcano, it's a different barrel length to the one that Lieutenant Day hands in of the Dallas Police Department.
I just wanted to break down the general story of the general arm, and then we can get into that particular.
Yeah, my theory was that the one was an infantry rifle, long rifle, and one was a carbine. But what you're saying, I always consider, like Joseph knows, all intelligence analysis is kept under review. I did not know that these rifles have been refurbished and there was a different. What you're saying is that the factory or the gunsmiths shortened some barrels.
There was millions of them made before and during the Second World War. And
that was a standard Italian army rifle.
These different rifles that have been shipped all different places had come back to the factory, and now the Italian government and arms are sitting on these millions of rifles and put them up for sale. And they sold a consignment of 570,000 of them to the Adams Consolidated / Folsom Arms. They and 300,000 of them were known to be somewhat defective. And so they also gave them about 5,300 kilograms of spare parts and bits and pieces. They then hired an Italian gunsmith. They then hired an Italian gunsmith, whose name eludes me right now, to go over them and clean them up, make them all work, and then ship them out. He did about 100.
It's a bit like a Fiat. You have to send it back to the dealer to get it fixed as soon as you've taken delivery.
It was before they took delivery. It was done in Italy, and they had to remove the markings. Except some 5,200 of them did not have their markings and serial number removed. They were all supposed to have all identifying marks removed, have the barrels shortened or lengthened, depending on what the American market wanted for the sport shooting clubs. And though after 150,000, the deal went south. Some more came over, but 5,200 of them were impounded by customs for a while, where the Kennedy Carcano supposedly was one of them. Eventually, after sitting there, it went to the Chicago sporting goods store, and eventually it was then sold to a Heidel at Oswald's P.O. box, which does not, and the mail, the problem with the mail.
We know Oswald. We got puppy.
What Oswald didn't get, if Oswald was Heidel, which we don't know if Heidel was Oswald, and there's no paper that a Heidel was allowed to take mail or accept mail to the post box, which is one thing.
Well, he couldn't have received it. He could. Oliver Stone has demonstrated that postal regulations at the time would have meant that Heidel could not have received it would have gone back to sender.
That's it. That's exactly it. So Oswald had no weapons parts of this gun. He had ordered no ammo. However, by the way, Joseph, you'll get a kick out of this. About 500,000 rounds of the Carcano ammunition had been bought by the CIA. Because they were going to send a bunch of these rifles off to the Cubans and whoever else wanted to fight with them.
That I didn't know. So the CIA were buying up large numbers of Carcano rifles to send down for use in Bay of Pigs and places like that.
Shocking that they would be involved in such a thing. And when the testimony of Eugene Booth and Seymour Weitzman, who found the rifle, was for the first 24 hours that they found a Mauser. And they claimed it was a Mauser. And I love the picture. I have that.
They
picture.
went further, Tino. They were claiming it was a 7.65 Mauser, and that's important.
And I love this photo.
Wait a minute. Whoa. It's important because the 7.65 Mauser was never a Mauser that was issued to the German army. It was a special rifle that they made for the Argentinian military.
That is correct.
Yeah, I didn't know that. So that is the rifle that Lieutenant Day claims belonged to Oswald.
This rifle here.
Yes, that was right after he came down and said this was. And interesting is that no fingerprints were actually taken, but I see his greasy fingers all over it. I mean, isn't that normal?
Oswald never handled that gun, and it wasn't. Viewers should understand that gun was not fired.
And
fired on 22nd November 1963. The gun had not been fired, and the Dallas PD boys knew it had not been fired.
Yep. Oh, well, it's not entirely true that Oswald never had his hands on the rifle, because according to the mortician, he did after he died. The rifle was shipped back to Dallas.
Well, but he did, when I said, never had his hands on the rifle when he was alive.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. What happened after he was dead? That's another story. After the FBI guy whacked him, I say FBI guy. I'm referring to their asset down in Dallas.
There we go. And it's just interesting that one of the police officers testified later that he had ejected the spent round, the last round. So Oswald supposedly shot 3 rounds. There's 2 rounds that was found. The third casing showed up later with a dent in it. Then there was the live round he ejected. That means that the Carcano holds 6 rounds, and they'll only be fed through a clip. Was the clip ever found?
No,
the clip wasn't with the gun. That photo. Now, someone needs to get hold of that photo. This is where Ollie Stone's boys could come in, because he's got some good forensic people and he's got some resources. That photo needs to be blown up. Many times.
Yeah, I agree.
You won't. The clip is normally out of sight, but you should be able to tell. The clip isn't exactly smooth with the rifle. You should be able to tell that there's no clip in that gun. Now, that gun does not have a clip in it.
No,
I know, because Joe handed the clip in later. The CIA established in early 64, I think. The CIA established that there was no clip. We had better get a clip into the Warren Commission.
So they actually
that rifle does not have a clip.
So they eventually came up with a clip. Sort of.
Yeah, the CIA boys eventually came up with a clip. I think what I'd like Ollie Stone's boys to do is to blow that photo up multiple times and just show everybody there ain't no clip in this gun, boys.
I keep thinking there must be more photos than this.
There probably are.
From different angles.
This is the famous one.
Yeah. And
so that will not have a clip. But again, this is something, because what I'm hoping Ollie Stone will do is a follow-up documentary to JFK Destiny Betrayed, and I'm hoping that blowing up the photos of the rifle to demonstrate it didn't have a clip would help.
There's so much here that people who, and it's kind of sad to think that a lot of the people that are in college today, they were not born at this time. And they don't remember all the great music of the 80s and 90s. There's so much of this they don't know. I mean, we've all run into kids who haven't heard of Pearl Harbor, who had no idea what happened in Vietnam, who barely remember 9/11, and they don't remember the death.
Many college students were born when 9/11 happened, never mind Pearl Harbor.
No, I guess college age today, you'd be born around 2000, right? And you are
exactly. You might be born around about the time of 9/11 or shortly thereafter. To them, it's either ancient history or they're like Joe Biden. They didn't know it happened.
Well, but the problem is, and this is my message to those who are in college today, or those who's watching, or listening to their professors, or listening to the news, and the horrible thing is, one day you have to wake up and realize everything you think is true may not be. And it's a very hard realization to realize that the foundation of what you thought the world was is wrong.
Well, yes, keeping an open mind is always a good thing for a college student. I mean, I would encourage all college students to keep an open mind.
I think the season for open minds are closed.
Yeah, they do. We are in a closed season for open minds, but you don't want a mind as open as Joe Biden's. I mean,
well, it's kind of
an open mind and a vacuous mind.
It's kind of lingering around out there. Joseph, how would you, to a new generation, in 60,000 words or less, explain what happened with Kennedy? Assuming that we may have somebody here who's college doesn't really know.
Let me put it this way. I was 6 years old when that happened. And all I can describe for you is the effect that it had on me as a 6-year-old boy. Watching not only your president being murdered, and of course the films come out later, but the television at the time was 24/7 coverage. So you're hearing about the president being murdered, and then you watch a man claiming to be a patriot step out on CBS News on Sunday morning and literally kill Lee Harvey Oswald in cold blood right on TV in front of your eyes when you're 6 years old.
Yeah.
When you're 6 years old, what that does is it shatters the narrative permanently. And the narrative that was shattered for me was that this is a great country and we're all free and nothing like this happens here.
Yeah.
So I became, as a result of that, as did many people in my generation, my entire family, I guarantee you, Democrats and Republicans, in my entire family, I cannot think of one person that actually believed the narrative of the Warren report when it came out.
Oh, well, that's because we have a bright family.
Well, no, it's because the family. I'll tell you what happened, Michael. My family not only didn't believe it, but they also would not talk about it publicly. So, in other words, what happened for us was it was a paradigm changer for the country.
Yeah.
Our views of the country changed as a result of that. And in my case, I became extremely skeptical of any media or government or corporate narrative.
Yeah.
So,
that I can understand. I mean, I look, in England, I was 6. We're about the same age. And I was almost exactly the same age. I was 6 when the president was shot. And that had a huge impact on me. I didn't see the Ruby assassination live. I don't think it was because the timing was wrong for English television on a Sunday. But the Kennedy assassination, no, I was 6 and I can remember the news and I can remember the reaction of my family.
Yeah, it was a punch to the gut.
Changed, or to be more precise,
the world
didn't
change
change.
for us, and people
the illusions were shattered.
The illusions were shattered, and this is what people have to
understand.
The world
changed for us.
Yeah, the world changed in a way that it has never been. The government has been trying to win that confidence and trust of the American people back, but I guarantee you, they've lost it forever.
They have now.
Why I keep saying that the truth about the Kennedy assassination has to come out. And it's a little bit unfair blaming America for it, since it was set up by German intelligence.
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem. And I agree with you. There's a huge German role in the whole thing. But here's the problem. If you view American history, let's say from Kennedy down to the election of Donald Trump, to me, that's one long arc of history. And if you look at American politics since the Kennedy assassination, what you're dealing with, the reason that American politics makes no sense, is that you're dealing with the long-term implications of a coup d'etat. And they have been trying to keep that narrative patched up and going and continuing, and it's gradually falling apart on them. There's all sorts of reasons why.
President Trump was never briefed in.
No, he never was, and this is the problem. Trump is a genuine outsider. Say what you will about him, love him or hate him, I don't care. The problem is with President Trump, if he and the way I view him is that he was a deep stater. That's true, but he was from a very different faction of the deep state than the one that's been in control of this country since JFK. That's the way
he was definitely an outsider.
Definitely an outsider. In that
arguably the most truthful president America's had since President Washington.
I think that he was quite a shock to the system, and that they are afraid of what he might do if he gets back.
And he never chopped down a cherry tree.
Yeah. So I view this, Tino, as one long arc of history, and that people have to understand that the paradigm in this country changed. As Michael said, the illusion was shattered with the JFK murder.
Yeah.
It seems that people have forgotten to some degree, because it's just like JFK, and I'm saying they because I think it's verifiable that there was a conspiracy to cover up the facts of the Kennedy assassination.
Oh, absolutely.
And by the mere, there's no doubt.
Man was shot by bullets of 2 different calibers. So, clearly,
like we said, there's one man with a poorly aimed rifle that he had in a bag that wasn't sighted. If you look in the facts of the case and the scope and everything, it's impossible. Even if he fired one crack shot.
The whole idea of a one-man sniper team. I mean, snipers.
No,
snipers work in teams. You don't have one-man snipers.
And the clincher was
the whole idea of a one-man team is silly.
But if we go to the
teams,
we can break down the details of why the Kennedy assassination could not possibly have happened according to that narrative. But you still see that this is the narrative. Yes. After all these years, 9/11, this is the narrative. And now, instead of physically going out and assassinating somebody, you don't have to do that now. And again, love or hate him, whatever you can say about President Trump, they have done everything they can as a political hit job on the man that is almost as real as if they put a bullet in him. Mm-hmm. With the press, with the media, with the smear campaigns, and if you.
Yes, but there's a difference, Tina. There's a difference. And the reason they had to do that is they could not get away with another assassination.
That's right. Now you do it differently. Now you assassinate everybody online. Right. Now you have self-fulfilling prophecies of the companies and the Facebooks and all these platforms that will assassinate you publicly without actually killing you. They'll just take you off the air.
It's one of the reasons why it is so important to expose the truth about the assassination of President Kennedy.
Yes,
because this is where it led.
To make it clear to German intelligence, who set the whole thing up, that 59 years after the event, we still care about America's lost president. And the truth still matters, and cover-ups at the end of the day will fall apart. The truth comes out.
We need to
in dribs and drabs.
We need to explain why we think German intelligence was involved.
Well, exactly. Well, my analysis is that Canaris ordered the hit in order to get.
Canaris?
Canaris.
Oh, Canaris is.
I've got to hear this.
All right.
Listen. No, wait. Stop. Please let me talk. The reason why we've got to hear this is because, of course, the narrative is that Admiral Canaris was executed for his share in the July bomb plot. Personally, I think that's a big pile of taurum excretum. Okay,
welcome to the club.
And number one, the guy is as oily and slippery as they come.
Well, exactly.
And number two, I'm a Madrid Circular guy. I believe that whole thing, if it happened, was a way for the Nazis to launder the profiles of people that they were planning to get out of Europe.
Canaris, of course, wasn't a Nazi. He installed the Nazis.
Yeah, well, I
very heavily involved in
let's not quibble here. Let's stick to the main narrative. If we keep quibbling of whether he was a Nazi or not, I know what you're saying. My point is that the whole July bomb plot was used as a crisis of opportunity, at the very minimum, by the Nazis to say, oh, we executed so-and-so. What they're doing is they're creating cover to get people out of Europe. That's what they're doing. You don't look for people that are dead. And Canaris would be just the snake that he was to pretend that, oh, I'm part of a bomb plot. They executed me. I'm not. I may look like Wilhelm Canaris, but I'm not Wilhelm Canaris.
Well, no. the great thing with Canaris is that the Germans boastfully published a book. A German agent called Colonel Whiting published a biography of Canaris in the 60s and included a post-war photograph of him. Yeah. Now, of course, the viewers will understand, well, hang on a minute. If he was executed at Flossenburg concentration camp in April 1945, how come there is a post-war photograph of him? What the Germans were being too clever. It's one of the great things about being opposed to Germany. They always have to keep, it's like riding a bike. The Germans can't ever stop. They lost World War II partly because they invaded the Soviet Union, which they did not need to do. And they were boastful and arrogant, and they got away with the idea that Canaris was executed in 45. They got away with that. So as a way of rubbing our noses in it, they get one of their blokes to publish a book with a post-war photo of Canaris with his favorite dogs, who are not Dachshunds. In World War II, they were Dachshunds. How do I know that? Well, because a friend of mine, Brian English, now dead, visited Canaris in World War II. He was a travel agent. The Germans thought he was a double agent. And he was known to Canaris and Frau Canaris, and who rather liked Frau Canaris. And he used to play with the dogs, who used to sit under Canaris's desk. They were quite sweet, apparently, a lot sweeter than the Admiral. And by the late 50s, the Dachshunds were dead, sadly. Canaris, however, wasn't. And this photo is published, and I've put it online. Just one moment, I can.
It's very simple. It's very simple. Canaris had a special assignment in World War I with Admiral Graf.
Yes. Gold
with Admiral Graf Spee. And his assignment was, as they were traveling around the Horn, he was to scout out locations for secret U-boat bases and so on and so forth.
Yes.
And he got back to Germany. So this man, Admiral Canaris, knows all the little coves and bays and ponds and so on in South America, where subsequently you are going to need to evacuate to. This is not a man that is going to be executed.
No, of course not.
And and I'll tell you what, even if Dolph wanted to execute Canaris, Martin isn't going to let him have.
And he was a friend of Himmler's too, so
yeah.
Left.
It's a bit difficult. That's the book. The photo, the photo on my right is the wartime photo. The photo on the left is the late 1950s photo. Now, viewers can't really tell much from that, but in my columns on Veterans Today, I have reprinted this photograph, and I'm certain Ollie Stone's boys will be able to do the necessary calculations of the earlobe measurements. The ear is the one human organ that grows throughout life, and by doing the comparison of the earlobe measurements, you can show that the person on the left is a lot older, about 15 years older than the person on the right.
Well, I guess I should have realized, if we're talking about the assassination of President Kennedy, I should have pulled up a picture of Admiral Canaris. I should have known.
Well, absolutely, yes. I mean, he was a real scumbag. Every war and revolution.
I mean, and with Canaris, can't we just dig up the body and do a DNA test?
No. Well, we could. Brian told me once that he'd visited Canaris's real grave.
I thought he was cremated.
No, he wasn't cremated. Joseph will not be surprised to hear he has two graves. There's one in West Germany and one in East Germany.
Where have we heard this before?
Well, exactly. Yes.
Martin Bormann,
there is a grape. I don't believe
Heinrich Miller. Golly.
Oh, Heinrich Müller. Well, yeah. I mean, we know the story there. He's the head of Gestapo. And when they eventually get round to digging up what they think is Heinrich Müller, they find bits of
three
bodies
different
and
people.
none of them is Heinrich.
He was a multifaceted person.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
in which case he wasn't in the coffin at all.
I mean, it's and even I don't know a lot of people that know this. In the 1960s, Lee Harvey Oswald's mother wanted to have his grave exhumed, and because she wasn't sure who was in the grave.
Oh, I
and
see.
When they did, they got the grave up. There had been some breakage of the cover. They got it out, and the head fell off. Traditionally, the head is somewhat attached to the body, although decayed. Oh, got it. But the head had no sign. They did a complete cranial autopsy of him, cut a hole in the head. There was no hole in the head that was in the coffin of Lee Harvey Oswald's. So even the undertaker in an article in the Dallas Post said, I really don't know who was buried here. Just saying all these bodies that disappears all the time.
Well, that's very odd because there was no particular reason for Lee Harvey Oswald's body to go walkies. Very possibly it did.
Well,
and when we talked about MK Ultra before, well, Ruby, apparently after having the last session with a psychiatrist that went to visit him, a psychiatrist that had deep implications with roots to the CIA and MK Ultra, well, completely mad and hung himself. Speaking of suggestion, Joseph.
Well, yeah, but a lot of psychiatrists are completely mad.
Sure.
I mean,
well, yeah.
Let's get back to German intelligence and JFK.
Yeah.
Yay.
Because most people find the idea that this would be involved in JFK to be a bit fanciful. And I have been saying for years, Tino, you know very well that I've been saying this, that there has been a covert economic war between this country and Germany ever since the end of the Second World War. It's going on right now. But the German intelligence angle is actually confirmed by the fact that the Texas oil barons, Clint Murchison, Hunt, that whole Texas oilman nexus around JFK. Yeah, they had their own intelligence network. Okay, that was
Bunker Hunt, wasn't it?
It was Bunker Hunt and Cliff Murchison and that whole people that are hovering on the edge of the Dallas, Texas white Russian community, which has, of course, George de Mohrenschildt, oil geologist. I personally know someone who was in that crowd. And their private intelligence network, and this is according to Professor Peter Dale Scott, okay, their private intelligence network is none other than the Galen Org.
Oh, yes. Wow.
Yeah. So in other words, the Texas oilmen's connection to intelligence is through the German BND.
Yeah,
and the German BND is nothing but a rechristened Fremde Heere Ost from World War II.
Correct.
With the CIA blessing.
Yeah, with the CIA's blessing. So in other words, it's the Galen network that these guys are plugged into, and that network in turn, in my opinion, is the network that's actually running Oswald inside the Soviet Union. They're the only ones with boots on the ground inside the Soviet Union. The CIA doesn't have any.
No, the CIA's never been particularly good at human intelligence.
No.
Usually, when we have a CIA asset, it's usually a DVD asset or career group asset.
Somebody else's asset.
It's usually a plant.
So, in other words, German intelligence.
I mean, apart from anything else, the CIA would have had deep trouble getting Oswald into the Soviet Union.
Now, does anybody?
Yeah, absolutely. Galen reports the Canaras.
Are you familiar with this book?
Treason?
No, I am not familiar with that one.
Treason for My Daily Bread, Mikhail Lebediev.
Oh.
This is a very, very rare book.
Mm-hmm.
And it is there's a good reason for that. They buy up copies of this thing.
Oh, a bit like mine.
Nope. This is an entirely fictional book. Okay. But the problem is that it's published. It was published by a British publisher in 1977 from Guernsey.
Oh, from on the Farrell. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice
So, in other words, this is a really out of the way British publication. But the thesis of the fiction is kind of mind blowing. The thesis of the fiction is that it was none other than Martin Bormann who was the mastermind of the whole thing.
Well, that's possible.
Yeah, you've got to sit and read this, but
that's entirely possible. We know that the Dulles brothers were German spies.
Oh yes.
We know that Richard Helms was a German spy, and we know that John McCone had spotted Dulles, and we know that the Germans wanted Canaris, and the Germans wanted McCone out of CIA, and they wanted Dulles back in.
Yes.
After the assassination, because of the good work by Joe and others, the German connection was blown, and the Germans had to back off a little bit.
Well, they're telling us, the fingerprints are all over the assassination. They're telling us in so many words. They're telling us something by the fact that the alleged weapons are Mausers. One of the Mauser version is not a version that was ever used by the German army. It was used by Argentina. And the Mannlicher-Carcano is, oh, golly gosh, it's an Italian carbine. So, in other words, all we're missing here is a Japanese bayonet,
Oh, wait for it. The CIA will come up with one.
Yeah.
The sights were Japanese. The sights were Japanese, weren't they?
Yes, I think they were.
The sides of Japanese sites.
Okay, so we've got all three got all three axis powers represented here.
Absolutely, yeah.
And again, if I were to pick a weapon of choice for an assassination at that time, I would probably have picked the Mauser over
Mauser.
No. But then again, we're looking at several locations. So,
the Italians lost the desert campaign for a reason. One of the reasons was they had a crappy rifle,
and they didn't really want to. Their heart wasn't in it.
Well, it wasn't particularly in it. No, it's a bit like the EU. Their heart isn't in the EU either. But they were still in the war. They were in the war, and they're now in the EU. It wasn't. No professional sniper would choose a Mannlicher-Carcano 6.5 mil if you're going to assassinate the United States. Nor would a professional sniper work on his own.
Or a Mauser or an Enfield, but not,
exactly.
something that's accurate.
Not the Mannlicher-Carcano.
Yeah. Plus, is there ever any evidence that
Henry probably would have been a better choice?
Martini Henry, yeah. I mean, did there even evidence that Oswald he even trained with the bloody thing? He might have been a good Marine sniper.
No,
you've never seen him otherwise. There's no ammo at home, no oil, no nothing.
No, he wasn't in the Italian army. I doubt he ever handled the Mannlicher-Carcano in his life.
If Oswald here's the problem with the Mannlicher-Carcano. Let's cut the BS and let's cut right to Oswald's military training. He's in the U.S. Marines. At that time, if he's going to train with a rifle, he's going to train with a Garand, not a Mannlicher-Carcano. So, in other words, his training alone tells you that he's not going to use a Mannlicher-Carcano. He's going to use a weapon with which he's fairly familiar, and that would be a Garand.
Use the Mannlicher-Carcano.
Right.
Yes, exactly. And the U.S. Marines didn't use the Carcano for a reason.
No. No. It was a Garand, M1 Garand. So.
Exactly. He would have trained on the Garand. Yeah. The M3, wasn't it?
M1, I think it was.
M1. M1. Yeah. Okay.
Either way, there are plenty of options.
That's the point here. There's lots of options for somebody like an Oswald, to use. And besides, here's the other problem. Why, how? And this is what is left unexplained. How do we get Oswald into the Soviet Union, and then marrying the colonel, the daughter of a GRU colonel, gets a cushy job in Belarusia, of all places, in a television factory, And then we get the guy out of the Soviet Union with his daughter of a Soviet GRU colonel back into the United. How does all this happen? This is what's left unexplained. And again, the only network inside of the Soviet Union at the time that is going to have the boots on the ground to make that happen is Galen's network.
Correct. Correct. And Galen reports to Canaris. So
Galen reports to Admiral Canaris. Look, Canaris. Galen isn't smart enough to be running something
no. I mean, Galen was so dumb you could have put him in charge of the FBI. I mean, he made Christopher Wray look bright.
But I don't think look, given the head of the FBI at the time, I don't think Galen was into wearing dresses. But
no, well, we know J. Edgar Hoover was, which is why the Germans were able to blackmail him. Yeah.
Well, everybody was able to.
I will just give everybody out there a quick recap on who Reinhard Gehlen was for those who may not know. Reinhard Gehlen was the head of Fremdes Heeres Ost. He was the head of the German intelligence during the Second World War for Hitler. He had his bunker in Sussen next to the big communication center, and he handled all intelligence and intelligence gathering in the East, Soviet Union. After the war, he hid all his assets, told all his men to go hide. He turned himself into the Americans, the CIA, went to meet Dulles. I see your finger, and eventually was installed by the CIA officially to run all of German intelligence under Adenauer. Yes, Joseph.
And his headquarters was in Pullack, outside of Munich.
Indeed. Not far from the DVD.
Bormann's house.
Yes. And Pullack. Oh, hang on. Whoa. Pullack was next to, sorry, Joseph, say that again. Pullack.
The house that Galen had in Pullack was Martin Bormann's house.
Oh, well, that would make sense.
Isn't that lovely?
Yes.
Ready-made for the purpose.
That makes sense.
Ready-made for the purpose. We have our microphones in the walls. We have our two-way mirrors.
The two-way mirrors, yes.
We've got the movie cameras behind the pictures.
I'll tell you a story about the move. Some years ago, I was having a little drinkies, as you do, with the number 2 in intelligence coordination at the Reich Chancellor, or the Bundeschancellor, as they call it now, in Berlin. Nice lady called Patricia Wilson, whose father was English. She was German, but had an English name. And Patricia and I were just having a cup of coffee and at a break in a conference. And the BND, the Bundesnachrichtendienst, who are the fluffy bunny, up front boy, the front shop boys for German intelligence. I call them
the kind of gentler Gestapo, but go ahead.
The kind of gentler Gestapo, exactly. They're the sort of people who would torture you by tickling you, rather than pulling your toenails out. But they're awfully nice people. But they just moved Pullack to Berlin. They were awfully nice. They are awfully nice people. And they'd just been moved to Berlin because the Chancellery were very upset about the DVD's control of them. So I say to Patricia, "Oh, how are you getting on with the BND? I gather you boys, shifted them up to Berlin so the DVD would have less influence." And she went white as a sheet, and the coffee cup literally rattled. And somebody came up to me. An admiral, I think, came up. He said, "Michael, what are you doing to Patricia? She looks as though she's about to faint." She didn't know that we knew about the DVD. And I introduced it into the conversation quite casually. I said, "How are you getting on with the DVD these days?"
Are you talking the Verfassungsdienst?
Yes, exactly. This is
okay. I was having trouble.
Intelligence coordination at the Chancellery in Berlin.
Okay, I know what you're talking about now.
Yeah,
yes, yes, okay.
Not the BFE. No, not the BFE. The intelligence. This was she worked.
Bundesverfassungsdienst is what you're talking about.
She was in the Chancellor's office coordinating intelligence. Yeah, number two.
So is this why we no longer see intelligent, self-thinking politicians in any Western civilized European nation? Because we have them all underhand by the backhand of industry and intelligence running the show, covered by the press to see whatever it is we want to see. And basically,
I'll go you
the
one
civilized
further.
European nations and France all have dodgy,
and France.
and France.
all have dodgy people in charge of them. Yeah. I mean, Macron is as vicious as Pétain. Just doesn't have a uniform. I mean, he's not as gay as Pétain.
Well, look, yes. Anybody that goes to the battlefield of Verdun Memorial and says there's no such thing as French culture.
Joseph, it's not worth losing your head over.
It's just,
I'm being a little unkind. The French do have a culture, but it's their
not according to Monsieur Macron at the battlefield of Verdun. That takes some big brass ones to say that there.
I know,
but anyway.
That's almost something Biden could have done. I'm sorry. Did I go there?
The graves of Verdun, sadly, is because Pétain was working for the Germans. He was gay and he was being blackmailed by the Germans prior to World War I. That's why he ended up in charge.
Are we a little internal here, maybe?
Regarding your thesis about the insanity of Western political leadership, as you know, Catherine Fitz has been maintaining for years that one of the biggest problems is that the political leadership class is almost virtually and entirely co-opted with control files. That's problem number one. So they're literally being blackmailed into absurd policy and absurd behavior. And if you stop and think of Biden Joe, the whole family is basically a family grift on the federal government for the communist Chinese.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for the Ukrainians, So there's there's no wonder why the United States is involved in this mess in the Ukraine under this absurdity of a president.
Well, you just had an election that was largely bankrolled by Ukraine becoming.
Well, the election is as fraudulent as they come. I'll go on record right now. It's as fraudulent as it
and
comes.
not just here.
And not just here. But there's a deeper level, Tino, that I have suspected for a long time is in play. And that deeper level is you are very possibly dealing, and I'm going to be blogging about this in a future article, so watch for it, because some information just came my way that I think cinches the case. If you have access to supercomputers and the ability to game out various scenarios, incorporating massive amounts of global data, and please note the qualifier, global. If you are a technocrat with access to that kind of information, the computer models say, then you are going to behave according and plan your policy according to the computer models. So in other words, if you're looking for one reason why the leadership of the West seems so inhuman and so insane, I suspect that at a very deep level, they're simply following what their computer gaming scenarios tell them to follow.
Or what their civil servants are telling them to do based on
the modeling or whatever. But here's the point: garbage in, garbage out.
Yes.
This is the problem with this whole technocratic society. And I really do suspect that this is a scenario, and I'll tell you why. Most of our financial trading, City of London, Paris, Frankfurt, New York City, Tokyo, certainly the Shanghai Exchange, this is all being done now, by and large, by computer algorithmic trading. Yes. So in other words, the markets do not reflect genuine human risk assessment and management. This is all machines.
Well, we just saw that in the coup in Britain. We just had a coup that was triggered by markets in terms of running based on algorithms.
Algorithms, exactly. And this whole thing is going to come crashing down, because you'll notice something else about this whole computerized society. if you know, I've been watching these things ever since 1987 when we had our first computer-driven flash crash.
Right.
That was the first flash crash that was done by computers. Right. There have been several since then, and fortunately they've been able to pull the plug, but sooner or later there are going to, it's just statistically improbable that with all of this algorithmic trading, you're going to get at some point a flash crash that affects not just one system, but several at the same time.
Makes sense. No, I go along with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that does that.
So are you actually saying there's hope for humanity? Because
there's plenty of hope for humanity. There's no hope for Joe Biden, but there's hope for humanity.
But he will never know.
He will never know what's
He'll never know. He'll never know.
I mean, could you get a more pathetic shell of a man?
3 words. No.
Well, Rishi Sunak, possibly. I mean Sunak's not that much brighter.
Well, he's got money and he lives there next door. He lives in a house here in Monica.
Oh, look, I don't even want to start on Great Britain. To me, it's you know, I go back to my experience at Oxford, and I was there when Maggie Thatcher was prime minister.
Yeah, I like Maggie. Maggie was an old friend of mine. I like.
Well, you know, lover or hater, at least the country was functioning.
Well, it was. Yes,
it was. And, you know, I arrived there right in the miners' strike with Arthur Cargill. You know?
Oh, yeah. Now, look, in those days, I was a lefty. As a young, trendy lefty lawyer, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, I was actually advising miners. I was on picket lines in the miners' strike as a monitor. Nearly got beaten up by the Metropolitan Police. Well, I didn't get beaten up, but I wasn't that far from it. I was literally on the front line.
You know, my point here is that even the trendy lefties were not off the cliff insane.
No. I mean, Arthur Scargill wasn't insane. He was just a very poor tactician.
Yeah.
But now I met Arthur. I knew Arthur Scargill.
It's unrecognizable to me. And the sad thing is Great Britain is not nearly as far along on the insanity and stupidation coefficient index as we are.
Well, we've got a fast track Simon Case running the country, so no wonder it's not working. He's the cabinet secretary. I call him the Simon von Case, the cabinet rescuer.
Simon von Case.
Yeah, no wonder the mess with the cabinet office running.
As far as the Germans go, I think the whole thing about Brexit was to keep the British tax havens out of German hands. That's what it was about. That's what I really think.
It's funny you should mention that. It's funny you should say that. Just before the coup, a British warship, she was a Royal Fleet auxiliary, but you would call her a warship. I mean, in the US Navy, the oilers and so on, the fast replenishment vessels are naval vessels. Right. In England, they fly the Red Ensign. They're part of the Royal Fleet Auxiliary. But they're quite big ships. I've seen one Tide-class ship up close. They're very impressive. They look like a warship, even if they're not. And one of those headed over to one of our more discreet offshore jurisdictions where a lot of trading is carried on, offshore high-yield trading. And
how convenient.
The whisper is that the Special Boat Service were aboard. The great thing about Royal Fleet Auxiliaries is they've got lots of volume and plenty of space for GCHQ detachments, special forces, up there in the bow of the ship. So we apparently rolled up to one of our offshore jurisdictions with a bunch of SBS guys, allegedly to deal with a bit of gang violence. Well, you don't need a bloody special boat service to deal with gang violence.
And SAS forces. No,
I mean, why not have a squadron of B-52s? I mean, you do not need the special boat service to deal with the gang. So I think that something was happening. Now, as it happened, coincidentally, some weeks before, I had put up to the Chancellor of the Exchequer a guy called Kwasi Kwarteng. Thank goodness he's black. Thank goodness his middle name wasn't Kevin. Otherwise, it'd been KKK initials, which would have been a bit embarrassing. Anyway, KK. I mean, his parents were right not to give him. Kwasi Kevin would not have worked.
No.
I had done a briefing for a mutual friend, and I had alerted him to offshore high-yield trading programs, and I had suggested we need to take over these various offshore jurisdictions. In other words, put proper people in, not Foreign Office governors, proper retired admirals and so on. And then we sort out all the money that's owed to the British Treasury, the billions of pounds that banks have salted away, earnings on which they have not paid tax, etc., etc., etc. And then next thing I know, a Royal Fleet Auxiliary is rolling up to one of these jurisdictions with a bunch of special forces off board. And then the next thing I know is the Chancellor's fired, and then the Prime Minister's chucked out in a coup. I don't think Liz Truss was actually as stupid as she looked. She looked stupid, she sounded stupid, but I don't think she was in fact stupid, even though she was a Prime Minister.
Stranger things have happened. So you sent a gun. How traditional British.
I'm glad you mentioned Maggie, Joe. Joseph. I like Maggie. I mean, Maggie
I like Mrs. Thatcher too.
Yes,
but
I like Dennis even more. Dennis. Oh, Sir Dennis was a great character. He was lovely.
But I think what we have, if we look backwards, we had proper statescraft. We had proper statesmen. Yes, we had intelligent, regardless of what side they may have been on, or who they might have been hired by or operated by. They had a proper education. They understood the world, and they weren't leaning on, like you said, Joseph, on models. They were leaning on people, on information, on the society around them. And some of them actually had life experiences and had jobs and held businesses. We don't have that anymore.
Margaret Thatcher was a statesman.
The shift in terms, at least of this country, but I suspect the rest of the world, in terms of not having actually competent political leadership, was 9/11. Because if you look back on Bush the stupid, as I like to call him,
younger Bush,
the young guy. If you look back on,
I've never people. I was dealing with the CIA and various other people because I was involved in the 9/11 investigation, and I have to say, those who briefed in George W. Bush personally, and he was briefed in about a paper I wrote on Iraqi involvement in 9/11, say that he wasn't actually that stupid. I know his MBA was only from Harvard, but even so, he did get an MBA, and he looked stupid, he sounded stupid, but that's partly because he was dyslexic.
Well, I can believe that.
I was me who made that point to the CIA. I don't think it had been diagnosed. I said, I think your president is dyslexic.
Yeah, I can believe that.
He can't read teleprompters. I said, I think the guy is intelligent, but I also think he's mildly dyslexic. Intelligence and dyslexia often go hand in hand. Very bright people often suffer from.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me. But my point is.
So I wouldn't say he was stupid. I
use that as a nickname for other reasons. Like, no, Mr. President, it's nuclear, not nuclear. I'm not a Bush family fan, so everybody knows that I refer to him as Bush the Stupid as opposed to King George.
I understand. Well, I'm not a Bush family fan either, but I am a fan of George W.
Well, in any case, my dislike of the family goes to their association with the Clintons, and that's another. The family. I think I draw a distinction, as I say in my book, Spy Hunter. Again, another little advert. Available £55, shipped from UK to America. Takes about a week. It doesn't actually go by ship; it goes by plane. I always referred to George W. Bush as the first American Bush. I mean, the previous Bushes were German. The old man was German. The uncle was German. And people forget about the uncle, Prescott Bush Jr. He was a very sinister man. He was even more sinister than his brother, George H.W. Hell, he was even more sinister than Prescott is bad news.
Prescott was very bad news, and his old man Prescott Bush Senior was very bad news too, working for Admiral Canaris. Yeah. Canaris's favorite senator.
Yeah.
And now you can look at the funding and the business processes that we talked about dating back to the Franco-Prussian War all the way up to 9/11, and who had an interest in that and today.
There's a continuity from the Franco-Prussian War. There's a continuity in Germany. There's a continuity in German intelligence between the assassination of President Lincoln and the assassination of President Kennedy, and the undermining of Donald Trump that Joseph was correctly identifying a little while ago. German intelligence has never been shut down. We didn't shut it down at the end of World War I. At the end of World War I, we decided, let's have another World War. At the end of World War II, we decided, let's have a Cold War, because we just left Germany in place. We didn't break the place up, and we left German intelligence in place. So we were pretty stupid.
It was
that I think, Tino, is something that needs to be emphasized. Because if you look at the actual structure of the German deep state under the Kaiserreich with the Kaiser, when the Kaiser abdicates and goes into exile in Holland, basically the entirety of the actual power structure in Germany is left unchanged.
Correct.
You still have the general staff, you still have the big corporate cartels, and so on that are all
networked. And guess who was reporting to the Kaiser? Admiral Canaris.
Yeah. So
and why did the Kaiser go to Holland? Because it was next door to Germany.
It was it was also a neutral too. That was the other.
It was neutral, and he didn't go very far. Canaris was always loyal. He never saw Hitler as the German head of state, not the legitimate head of state. Hitler was about as legitimate as Joe Biden in Canaris's eyes. Canaris always saw himself as loyal to the Kaiser. He was an imperial German Secret Service man all his life, and he reported to the Kaiser till the Kaiser's death in 1941. But then after the Kaiser's death, I think continued to report to the Hohenzollern family.
That would not be a bit surprising to me, because
my own contacts with Hohenzollerns have been very limited, as you can imagine, and very discreet.
Well, you know the complaint of Hitler. Hitler's complaint was that he had an imperial navy.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yes. He was right.
and he was right.
I mean, Hitler wasn't stupid. Again, although he was a politician, he wasn't completely stupid. No, that is correct. The German Navy remained an imperial navy, and it's odd, of all the three German services, the one that behaved correctly by and large, apart from the U-boats, but the German surface navy on the whole behaved correctly, as we saw with the treatment of the British prisoners on board the Graf Spee, which of course undermined the Germans somewhat, because they didn't shoot the prisoners. They kept them below decks. And then the prisoners all were debriefed by a friend of mine, who said things got very, very cold. And the intelligence officer, a man named Captain Henry McCall, who was interviewing them, debriefing them, said, well, this is a bit strange. This is summer. This is the southern hemisphere. It's December. This is the summer. What the hell are you doing freezing below decks in the Graf Spee? Because they'd been down to Antarctica.
Yeah.
And Henry McCall then got to know, he actually served in the Mediterranean Fleet alongside a young intelligence officer called Louis Le Bailey, who ended up as the head of British Defence Intelligence, Vice Admiral Sir Louis Le Bailey. I've got his books here. Now, where are we? There we are. That's one of Sir Louis Le Bailey's books, The Man Around the Engine. By profession, he was an engineer, and he even was kind enough to do a dedication. There we go. There's a dedication signed to Michael. Best wishes, Louis Le Bailey. Now, Vice Admiral Sir Louis Le Bailey knew Henry McCall, and Henry, who was a very senior intelligence officer, later became an admiral, was serving, say, in the Mediterranean Fleet on a sister ship of HMS Naiad. Louis was on Naiad, and Henry was on Hermione or something. I mean, they were in the same squadron together, and they knew each other. And there's a link then to me, because long after Henry McCall died, Louis Le Bailey and Michael team up. And Louis and I we were a pretty good team, I have to say. He had spotted Edward Heath as a wrong one and saved Honduras. It's actually saved the whole British colony. But he had the goods on Ted Heath over paedophilia and having boys chucked off the side of his yacht because he had a bloke on the yacht, a petty officer, naval intelligence. So Louis has a guy on Heath's yacht, the Morning Cloud, who says, hang on, Edward Heath is buggering boys and then murdering them, or having them murdered and tossed over the side. This was very valuable hold on the Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister was forced to allow HMS Ark Royal to do a UE in the middle
of that whole global pedophilia network is also, in my opinion, the real reason why they're trying to prop up the Ukraine. Because I think the Ukraine has basically become the new transshipment point for a lot of that activity. That's my suspicion.
I've heard whispers about Ukrainian organized crime. We know that Zelensky is corrupt. We know he's only officially a comedian. It's slightly odd, in fact. Both America and the Ukraine have comedians in charge, but only one of them is an official comedian.
And none of them are very funny.
And none of them are
very funny.
Well, if you look at the way, we're talking about deep state and intelligence agencies and so on. If you look at the way that the Ukraine has been used as a beta test in recent years for so many things, the biolabs, the Banderist units, the neo-Nazi units in the Ukrainian military, GMO foods, and all of this stuff. It's the connections are there for all to see. And the Biden family is squatting right in the middle of all of them. And like it or not. So I think people have to wrap their minds around this. And it is true, this, if you look at the structure of German intelligence, as you pointed out, the only thing that's really changed is the name.
Correct.
Yeah. The methods remain the same.
The methods and the personnel, the actual personnel, institutional connections have remained more.
Canaris is involved in German intelligence for 64. He dies. He eventually snuffs it. I am told around 78. Now, I'm very willing to revise that, but that's my estimate. Adolf Hitler snuffs it in 51, according to my sources.
Canaris snuffs it in the late 60s, 70s as well, early 70s.
Yeah.
Yes, that's the sort of time scale I've got for Martin Bormann. They didn't, oddly enough, they didn't make Martin Bormann. Yeah. It's odd. They didn't make Martin Bormann Secretary General of the United Nations. They made Kurt Waldheim, who was one of Canaris's boys.
They had Hallstein. He was close enough.
Hallstein. Oh, boy.
Waldheim was made Secretary General of the United Nations, not in ignorance of the fact that he was a German war criminal, because he was a German war criminal.
Of course, he's the one that thought up the whole idea.
Well, exactly. Ideal to be Secretary General of the UN if you're a war criminal. Canaris is involved in German intelligence, as Tino rightly points out, on board SMS Dresden, the light cruiser that escapes from the Battle of the Falkland Islands, partly because it's got a shitload of gold on board, excuse my language. And
he has this special assignment.
And he has the special assignment. Graf Spee sends the Dresden off in another direction, sacrifices his squadron. So important was the Dresden and her cargo. Canaris ends up back in Germany. He is involved in German intelligence prior to World War I. And he snuffs it in 1978. So you're looking at around 65 years of involvement in German intelligence by the same man who ends up running the show, installing Hitler, takes over from Ludendorff. Ludendorff takes over from Warburg. Canaris takes over from Ludendorff, and there's a continuity because Canaris knew Ludendorff and Ludendorff knew Warburg, and Canaris knew Warburg. And you have Canaris's proteges taking over the DVD, although there's a big split. Bush 41 is involved there. The DVD seemed to have split into two major factions, and they battled for control of the agency after Canaris's death. Bush 41 was in the head of one of those factions, along with Prescott Bush. The other faction was a slightly more intelligent faction that was associated with the nuclear winter theory and was against the idea of America and Russia having a nuclear exchange because Germany was going to end up in the middle of it. And they finally worked out, oh, shit, if the Americans wipe out the Russians and the Russians wipe out the Americans, we're going to get wiped out as well, along with the rest of Western Europe. Maybe a nuclear war is not such a good idea. And that faction is associated with a couple of American presidents. I won't mention them. One of them was a peanut farmer, but I won't go further than that. And the Rockefellers, that faction, the Rockefellers and the Bushes were in different factions of the DVD. But you've got whichever faction you're looking at, whether it's the Rockefeller faction or the Bush faction, you have got a continuity. The good thing is that there's also continuity in British intelligence and indeed also in American intelligence. I was briefed in Washington by an FBI officer attached to the Washington field office of the FBI, not the headquarters, the field office. And he was involved and was aware of the tapping of monitoring by the FBI of Edward Heath on his visit to the United States in 1939-40. Heath becomes British Prime Minister as a German spy. And also Jean Monnet, who becomes heavily involved in setting up the EU. He also is a German spy. He's an arms dealer. And we then have a deep conversation. And he was in touch with FBI guys long retired in their 80s who were involved in tracking these German assets in World War II. That was the meeting where I shopped a traitor to you guys and Bush 41, because it was done through the field office. And because we did the whole thing off the telephone, I mean, God, what a relief it was to have a face-to-face meeting with a serious counterintelligence officer without having to go through a blasted telephone and blow the whole thing to the Germans. And the amount of people that blow things over open phone lines drives you nuts, although sometimes I take advantage of that by saying things on open phone lines I know the Germans are going to pick up, which I'm sending them in a totally different direction.
Profiles by talking on the phone, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, anyway, I blew this traitor, Bush Senior, 41, didn't know about this conversation, which was literally behind a pillar in a bar in a hotel in Washington. And it was conducted in very secretive tones. I mean, it would look great in a movie of his life or mine. And they put a wiretap on this traitor's phone. I won't give his name, but he shared with a famous American golfer, not Nicholas. And he wasn't a golfer, but he shared his name with the golfer. And Bush 41, unknowing, then rings this guy, and they have an insane conversation, which the FBI then tap, which gave the Fibbies really useful material on Bush 41. This guy was involved in financing. He was involved in a thing called the Millennium Foundation, which was bankrolling American presidents. The Millennium Foundation, Joseph, or the American Millennium Commission. I think it's the Millennium Foundation. It provides retirement funds for American presidents.
You mentioned the factions, the Bush faction and the Rockefeller faction.
Yes.
I want to pose a hypothetical question to you. When you look at the insanity of the political class in the West, it strikes me that the old Rockefeller network is falling apart or has been eclipsed because it has lost its old leadership, which was very cautious in the way they proceeded. David Rockefeller, gone. Zbigniew Brzezinski, gone. The only one remaining from that old nexus of power is Henry Kissinger, and he's not being listened to. And what's he counseling? Well, he's counseling move slowly.
I like Henry. Now, he may work for the opposition. He does work for the opposition. But I have to say Henry is class. He's a serious intelligence officer. And we haven't had that many dealings. But he rang me up at home. And, I ended up calling him Henry. And he ended up calling me Michael. He's actually quite a nice man. And he's a man of... He's a formidable opponent, and he's a man I admire.
My question is could part of the reason why the Western political class be going so off the rails be because a different faction? Yeah. That's what I thought.
I agree. The Bush faction has largely taken control of the DVD. The current, we're not quite sure who the current head of the DVD is. A man named Soros, a dodgy Hungarian, is one. Has been linked. But we're not quite sure. We do know there's been a power battle inside the DVD. We know that Soros is involved. We think that Henry Kissinger has been kind of sidelined. The old boy's getting on a bit. I mean, he's getting on a bit. I hope he's with us for a few years yet, because I on a personal level, I like the man. I also trust him in the sense that if Henry tells me he's going to do something, he will do it. He doesn't bullshit you. He's a major player who respects other major players and abides by major player rules. And as a major player, I get pissed off when people do not abide by the rules, like having me arrested. Although strange things happen, including the trial judge in my case getting whacked. Incidentally, if the Bar Standards Board are listening, I was not consulted on. Nobody came to me and said, "Michael, can we whack the judge in your case?" There's a thing called the Bar Standards Board Handbook, and there is guidance in there about barristers getting involved in having judges whacked. It's not encouraged. I didn't know the judge was dead. Actually, it was more than a year went by before I was even aware the judge was dead. And I looked him up to find out what he was doing, and I knew he'd retired early. He had to retire early after the cock up of the trial where he was involved. I think he was also, in fairness to the judge, I think he was a bit distraught to discover, apparently, that the plan was to murder me in prison. So when he sentenced me to a year, the plan was I wouldn't come out of prison. They were going to send me to prison in the Isle of Wight, and some ISIS terrorist lined up with a knife to saw my head off. And, you know what it's like, Joseph, getting your head sawn off? That can be really irritating.
That can be.
That's a bummer, I tell you, getting your head sawn off. And MI5, I was actually stuck in a cell at Wandsworth Prison, at Southwark Crown Court, waiting while the prison bus went. And what I didn't know was this a big argument. Was I going to live or die? Was I going to go down to Parkhurst and get my head sawn off, or whichever prison it was around the way? Or was I going to go to Wandsworth, where at least I wouldn't get my head sawn off? And I ended up with a bunch of nice sex offenders in Wandsworth. Well, they put me in the sex offenders because I had to be. I was a barrister and I'd been a judge. So they had to put me on what's called the rule. They couldn't house me in the general population.
Right.
So most of the people on the rule were sex offenders. But as it happened, they were very nice sex offenders on the whole. And there was a lovely IRA gunman too. Joseph, you'd have liked this guy. You couldn't wish to meet a nice gunman. He couldn't have wished to meet a nicer. He was a great fan of Barrett. He used to organize Barrett sniper rifles for the IRA and all sorts of other AKs as well and what have you, and some Semtex and he was very good with Semtex. And we actually, from prison, I set up a deal with the IRA. They wanted to know why we had Mountbatten whacked, and they confirmed to us that the request to whack Mountbatten had come from MI5. So these clowns stick me in a prison with an IRA gun runner, and oh dear, we had great fun.
Josie might have this wonderful assassin you need to meet.
Going to be in prison was a very silly idea. And
you learn a lot on the inside, right?
Yeah, well, I'm gay anyway, so it wasn't exactly hard. And being housed with the sex offenders was fun. So I cut this deal with the IRA. Thames Valley, you have absolutely no idea what is going on. Absolutely no idea. And then we set up a meeting. We set up a meeting with the Queen. and a nice IRA terrorist called and the Queen and Martin McGuinness have a conversation, allegedly by accident, but it was about as accidental as the ramming of a US warship in the South China Sea. And we'd actually set this up with Buckingham Palace, all from inside a bloody prison cell. It was very funny. And then the IRA split because McGuinness was briefed in about the German connection to the IRA. He didn't know the DVD were running the show. And there was a split, and McGuinness had to be whacked.
If you keep this up, I'm going to have to take a nitro pill.
Well, we're kind of. I mean, I've got to get up at 4:45 in the morning because I've got an early hearing in London for my day job as a lawyer, and I'm not practicing as a barrister, but I can do things. I'm doing a social security tribunal. There we are, acting for a nice poor person tomorrow in a social security tribunal. So we're just about coming to the end, I think. Are we not, Tino?
There's one thing, and it's interesting.
No need to go for the nitro pill, but yeah.
Well, he might. We're not there yet.
Joseph is right. There is a factional battle, and the slightly more intelligent faction in the DVD have lost out to the slightly more brutal faction. And that's partly why we're having the spate of coups and assassinations and screw-ups.
But it's interesting because
we got a war in the Ukraine. The Germans have just bought themselves another war.
Yes, but it's interesting because Joseph, just if you asked your question, I was sitting with exactly the same thought that we had now come to the end of what used to be an intelligence or intelligent intelligence handling of matters, where you did things professionally behind the scenes. World War I, World War II crowd, the latter crowd, you did things. There's a way of doing things.
Henry Kissinger.
And now we have come to an impasse over the latter 20, 30 years, where you had a new generation of intelligence officers, of control files and politicians that has ramped everything up to the point where you can now have all these imbeciles in power because they all have control files being told what to do. And there's an agenda now of solidifying. I mean, what is the agenda? Well, I mean, we look at the global warming, we look at the green
global domination, but
the agenda has not changed, but the young Turks are in a hurry,
and they're messing it up,
and they're making mistakes.
Henry must be appalled. I mean, Henry Kissinger. I haven't spoken to Henry for some time, but Henry must be looking at this and the war in the Ukraine and must be thinking, "Oh my God, it's a bit like the invasion of the Soviet Union all over again."
That's how
the Germans aren't careful. The Russian army will be in Berlin.
I mean, see, that is what you get the sense that the older generation would never have made the mistakes that they're making today, because they literally, it seems that they put lunatics in charge who are pushing the agenda faster than
it's
Henry would not have approved of firing a Ukrainian rocket into Poland in the hope of triggering it.
You're dealing with young Turks who are listening to the computer models.
This
is the problem.
Yeah,
and they're in a hurry.
Yeah,
and because they're in a hurry, they are making colossal mistakes.
Correct.
They're almost, and the other problem is they're almost at the finish line, Tino. But as they approach the finish line, something increases, and that's the factional infighting, because every faction wants to be on top and in charge.
Yeah.
And this is what's going to bust the whole thing. It's already happening.
That's why the bad guys are going to lose.
No, you lay down.
Here's my final question before Michael has to go Betty bye.
Well, I've actually got to look at some papers for tomorrow as well.
We're just waking up here now.
I have to prepare. I have to prepare the case as well. I've got an extra bundle that's just been landed on my desk. So,
my question has always been, now my background is in history and psychiatry or psychology. And if I look through the lens of human nature and of history, and I look forward, I look at the agenda that's been pushed, the control they're trying to attain, both in politics, internationally, globally, digitally, everywhere. I do not see, and this is not a call to arms. It is, I do not see, with my professional background, a peaceful way back to freedom personal freedom, the constitution in this country, a civilized Europe, borders, countries, patriotism, sense of normalcy. I don't see a peaceful way out of this mess. There isn't, is there?
No. I mean, we don't have peace at the moment. We have a war in Ukraine, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. So I'd like to think a peaceful solution to the world's problems would be wonderful. But I mean, Britain, civil war preparations are already underway. I'm not saying there will be a civil war, but both in Britain and America, contingency plans for military intervention, civil war.
But how can there not be?
Both Britain and America are unstable. And when where you have unstable countries that are in the process of constitutional collapse, and in Britain's case, political and economic collapse as well, then of course contingency plans are being dusted off. I'm not saying that the contingencies will happen, but you have contingency planning just in case they do. So there may be some slight loss of life in Britain, sadly.
We are fulfilling all criteria of the components for civil wars and unrest, both in Europe, America, Britain.
Well, when
every Western civilized nation is on the brink, really. If you look at
when you have coups, we just had a coup in Britain. And the prime minister who was overthrown had the support of her party and had won handsomely against an opponent who's an idiot, who's now been installed without a vote of his party. Yes. So does not command the support of his party. He commands the support of MPs, but the MPs by definition are idiots. They're MPs. How can they not be idiots? And how can things be resolved? I mean, there's no democratic way of removing Rishi Sunak. And more to the point, the country's not run by the prime minister. He's just the figurehead. He's the monkey to the organ grinder. The organ grinder is Simon von Case, the cabinet Ratsführer or cabinet secretary. So how can you peacefully remove Simon von Case? Well, the answer is very difficult. Yeah. And so inevitably, when democracy is undermined, then the alternative is civil war or a military takeover. The same with the United States. You've now had 2 elections on a trot that have been rigged. So there is no democratic mechanism in the United States at the moment by which the American people can choose their leaders. Well, at some point, then the military step in, or there's a civil war, as you guys both our countries have had a civil war. We've had one in the 17th century. You had one in the 19th century.
What about Europe? I mean, Europe has no say.
Europe, there isn't a country in Europe that hasn't had a civil war or revolution or a fascist takeover. It was Italy, France, Germany, you name it. They've all either been invaded by Germany or been forced to join the EU.
Same thing.
There isn't a country in Europe with a stable political history going back centuries.
So where's Europe looking forward? Can they get out? The EU needs to go or be revamped back to
the collapse. The problem is the euro is supported by huge stolen funds offshore that were originally assembled by Bush 41 on the pretext of being used to support the Gulf War. There was a very nice lady called Madame Chiang Kai-shek, who was a friend of a friend. Madame Wu was one of her code names. Was
Wu. We went there.
Yes. Oh dear. She was a great character. I never met her. I mean, everybody I knew who knew her spoke very highly of Madame Wu, and that was her code name, or one of them. She had others. Madame Chiang Kai-shek was a real character. And Bush 41 had lent on Madame Chiang, and Madame Chiang had put up a lot of cash for the Gulf. She thought was the Gulf War, but it's in fact to support the euro, which was coming forward at the same time. Madame Chiang Kai-shek didn't know that Bush 41 was a German spy. Oh, she thought she thought Bush 41 was working for you guys, which is crazy, but that's what she thought. And I was involved in an intelligence operation that went on for years, trying to recover these funds. Which we never succeeded, and they're still there being traded, and they're propping up the euro.
Now, I gotta talk here. I gotta talk here. I gotta talk here. I gotta talk here.
Yes.
I'll shut up.
I have to ask you a question, Michael.
Fire away,
I'm sure once I ask the question, you're going to know where this might go. But I've got to ask you this question. Are you aware of the fact that when Mr. Trump was still in office, that there were people who approached him who were holders of the Kuomintang bonds that were issued to Chiang Kai-shek in the 1930s, and that they had approached President Trump about having them redeemed? And his response was, allegedly, we'll look into that. Were you aware of that?
I was aware of something. Yes, whispers. I'm not saying specifics. There was a guy involved in that in California.
Yes.
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 We won't name him on air. He was
let's not name him on air.
Ex-special forces. Once got shot down in China. Yes. No point. Don't send an email saying what was the U.S. Air Force.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about it on emails either. Yeah, no, exactly. I just wanted to know if you were. Oh boy. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, yes.
A
long time ago.
Now I'm on board with you. I just needed to get on board with what you were saying.
Yes, a long time ago, where there was a war in a little country called Vietnam.
Yeah.
And in the course of that war, it was necessary, since the Chinese are backing the North Vietnamese, it was necessary for the CIA to fly U-2s and other aircraft, including SR-71s eventually, over China. And unfortunately, one of them got shot down.
I have another little off-the-topic question here.
Yes. When you have a U-2 shot down, you got to over China. You got to rescue the pilot. Then a helicopter went in to rescue the pilot, and somebody betrayed the mission.
Does all of this, in your opinion, have anything to do with the Morgenthau bonds?
Possible, but I'm going to be. I shan't be drawn into expressing a view. I'm going to be.
I understand.
Yes, Henry Morgenthau was a very interesting man with very sound ideas from the Germans.
Yes, he certainly
was. Followed the if we'd followed the Morgenthau plan, we wouldn't have the problem we have today, because Morgenthau wanted to break Germany up. Well, he was the one bloke in the Roswell
break it up and plow it under. Essentially, that's what he.
Yeah, but yes, and rightly so. If Morgenthau had his way, because Morgenthau understood that the Germans had organized the Great Depression. And he realized that if they left Germany in place, that the Germans would continue to manipulate economies and, assassinate presidents and have wars and so on. So Henry Morgenthau pretty much, he sensed that the post-war world was going to be one of financial crises, the recessions, depressions, wars, coups, assassinations, because Germany was not being broken up. And German intelligence was not being broken up. So President Roosevelt should undoubtedly have listened more closely to what Treasury Secretary Morgenthau had to say.
Roosevelt did listen. The problem, as I see it,
died. He died, and then an idiot called Truman took over. He wasn't up to running Missouri. Never mind the United States. He'd have been out as governor of Missouri.
Are you saying he was just a figurehead? How would have thought?
Well, he'd have been out of his depth probably as mayor of Independence.
He was out of his depth running the hat shop.
He's a great show. Nice guy. I mean, he wasn't evil at
Played
all.
The piano well.
Even though he was a Democrat. Exactly. Even though he was a Democrat, he wasn't actually evil.
So we can successfully trace the installation of governments, such as the Nazi being a public government, through businesses, through in intelligence, and we have all these assets and gold that was disappeared at the end of the Second World War, and suddenly you have then you have the creation of the CIA and the German intelligence, and none of them seem to be missing any money. Both while they're looking for Japanese gold, German gold handed over, all this gold that disappeared through Switzerland. And by the way, don't ask me about the gold train. I'm not buying it.
Gold, one thing people do with gold, as Joseph will understand, is that you look after it. By and large, people do not lose gold. They may hide gold. They may sneak gold out of Germany into Switzerland. They may dump it in lakes. But you trust me, viewers, ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening, if you dump gold, if you're a German, your German intelligence, your Abwehr, end of World War II, you're hiding gold in a lake. You are hiding it in a lake. You are not dumping it in a lake. There's a difference. And you don't just chuck gold bars into lakes. You may carefully secrete them into lakes, having taken very careful note of which lake it was. I mean, nobody in DVD was running around thinking, "Oh Christ, which lake did we stick this gold in?" Can you remember? No, X marks the spot. That will have been very carefully mapped. The same with the Japanese. They stuck gold into ships and sank them in Tokyo Bay. They scuttled them. But the idea was to raise the gold, raise the ship or raise the gold. They weren't losing the gold; they were just hiding it, so you guys wouldn't find it.
So is gold the weapon against the globalist takeover of the cashless society and crappy digital currency and all that? Is gold the weapon we have left?
Control of gold is very, very important because gold underpins trading programs. So yes, control of gold is very important. Finding out where all the gold is, and the official gold reserve figures are a total fiction. I remember one.
Oh, I was waiting for that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I was once asked by a contact with intelligence connections. It was a Canadian contact, in fact. Michael, can you place 43 metric tons of gold? I think, if from memory, the expression was AU. Most of the guys dealing gold they normally would say AU rather than gold. So I get a phone call at home back in Watermead, where I lived then. And I said, Michael, can you place 43,000 metric tons of gold? That's 43,000 metric tons of gold, of AU. And I said, oh, I'll ring around, see what's in the market. So there am I ringing around saying, look, guys, I've got someone that's selling 43,000 metric tons of AU. It's 99.99, whatever it was, percent pure. And he's got the gold certificates, good provenance. Any buyers? No, I didn't actually. Obviously, I'd be driving a slightly more impressive motor car than I am. I've only got a Daimler at the moment. I'd have a Bentley again if I'd succeeded, because I was probably on a quarter of a point commission. And a quarter of a point may not sound very much, but if you're selling 43,000 metric tons of gold, trust me, a quarter of a point is quite nice to have. But that was one transaction, verified 43,000 metric tons of gold in one transaction.
In what province was that clean?
It was clean gold out of China, in the sense that in the sense that any gold out of China can never be clean. This was clean, which was another way of saying it was fairly clean, but not actually pristine. But not illegal. I mean, nothing. I wouldn't do anything illegal, but it was, it was as clean as gold gets, which is it's like saying as clean as a Democrat gets. It's these things are. I shall cast a veil. These things are relative. Yeah. There are the gold depository in Cloten, Switzerland, under the airport, is so big they have a little electric train that'll take you around it. And Brian was telling me about having been taken by the Swiss on a run round the gold depository in Cloten on this train. There's a narrow gauge railroad under the airport to just service the gold facility. That's just one storage facility in Switzerland.
And here we are back to the Swiss again, and their slight influence and the continuation of German businesses just around 1945, when they owned so many German businesses that went bankrupt right before the end of the war. So start them up again right after the war ended. This Swiss again, yes.
Yes, I'm afraid the Swiss, there are more holes in the Swiss story than there is in their cheese. The Swiss are, I mean, we need to shut down numbered bank accounts. That whole thing needs to go. They need to have a referendum in Switzerland. They're great ones for referenda in Switzerland. We should cut a deal with the Swiss, buy some cheese off them and tell them to scrap the system of numbered bank accounts, which is an absolute invitation to fraud and all sorts of illegal goings on.
And yet the EU is getting rid of all of this specifically to combat fraud by controlling all the population.
Yes, the idea of the EU combating fraud is
Joseph, you have a thought, I can tell.
I have so many thoughts, but we would be here all day.
Well, exactly. We I need to. Sounds like your dog needs a drink. So do I. We probably ought to wrap it up there, Tino. But I hope we shall resume this discussion on another occasion.
Well, we have to, because we haven't actually talked about any of the things that we were supposed to be talking about.
Exactly. Well, that's because you had Joseph and I on. We like to
play our
own sorrow, as it were. But do get the link to dear old.
I'll keep trying on him.
Give Oliver, send Oliver the link. And hi, Oliver, if you see this, hi. We need to get Oliver in on.
I'll pass that on to him. And Michael, if you got to go, I totally understand. Joseph, I want to pick your brain on Roswell before we go, because at least we want to go there.
Okay, well, I'm going to duck out gently. I'm going to duck out gracefully, as I have work to do, I am afraid. But good night, everybody.
Good night,
everybody.
Nice
Joseph, great to discuss things with you.
Yes.
Bye.
Likewise.
And then we will fix what's rest of the world wrong with the world.
Tino, I need desperately to take a break, and my little dog is going nuts.
Go for it. I will catch people up on some of the names we've talked about, for those who don't know.
You're watching a chat? I haven't been watching chat. All right, I need to run my dog outside.
Go do your thing, and I will try to be coherent.
All right, little girl.
All right. Yes, I have not exactly. I haven't exactly watched the chat closely, because I've been trying to keep an eye on what we've actually been doing here. And before Joseph gets back, I just wanted to. Yes, we were talking about the continuation of what happened behind the scenes, and that's one thing that I think we really need to understand, and especially for a younger generation that haven't lived through a lot of these changes. Like the end of the Cold War was a phenomenal change that I think changed and broke up, at least visually, a lot of the things that happened. But if you look at the installation of governments throughout history and the disappearance of those disaffected, I am not one to say that Hitler and the Nazis were the ones that was the driving force behind what happened in Germany, because somebody put them there. Hitler did not. Yes, he was an orator. He was a very smart man. A lot of the top leadership of the Nazis, they were very smart people, and they're bankers, the backers, the industry that backed them, the ones who actually put them in the position where they could take power. And I think a lot of the German industry and American industry and British industry, those who put Hitler and his crew in a position where they could take over Germany, they did so for a reason. And also one of them was under the assumption they could possibly control him. And I think this was one of those marriages of convenience where Hitler was an idealist who had his ideas of what he wanted to do. And by doing deals with business and industry, and you see that during the entire time of the Third Reich, the industry was continuously run, taken care of, the bills were paid, just like there was a hand over a lot of these industries and their leaders. Even if they were co-opted in some way by the Nazi Party or the SS or the Gestapo, you still had their big businesses, and they made lots and lots of money on this war. And these industries that was segregated out towards the end of the war in 1944, Bormann had the big meeting in Strasbourg, where he had the leader with all German industry leaders at this meeting and told them, right, the war is over. We're going to lose the war. You need to divest yourselves of the German parts of the industrial assets and the patents and what you have to other countries, to your to the auxiliaries, to your other branch offices in all other countries. And so when the war ended, just like the German industry and big business, banking, IT Farb and BASF, a lot of these companies, they were at the end of the war bankrupt. So some paid reparations, like Siemens. Yes, they paid reparations. They lost a lot of the domestic assets, but the key components, the key assets, the money and the infrastructure that they had made during the war, a lot of these companies went bankrupt just towards the end of the war, transferred to Swiss ownership. So when the war had ended, well, these companies, well, they had very little in reparations to the Allies. The Russians took whatever they could. The Americans, the British, the French took whatever they could. The Poles did the same. But soon after, these businesses reenacted again. And it was back to business as usual. Most of them are still in business today. So the continuation of business through a Second World War, and I don't think a lot of you are really have thought about, you think Germany defeated, German business is done, and the bills are not paid because Nazi government is gone, right? Wrong. If you were a contractor that worked for, let's say you were the gardener or something, you worked for BASF or IG Farben or Siemens or any of the companies that supply to the war industry to Germany during the war. As the war ended, was over, the company was over, but your bill was still due because, well, you did gardening for Himmler for the past 6 months and you need to get paid. All these bills for all these companies to all these subcontractors were paid out of the money in the Reich banks, out of the money that was left over. The SS and Kammler, as we know, transferred lots of money to Swiss bank accounts. General Kammler had Swiss bank accounts. He oversaw. Himmler had some. Schellenberg most certainly had some. And Bormann, all of these components, even there was even the Reich für Adolf Hitler, Himmler fund, and Hitler had his own fund and source of bankers and bankers. A lot of these funds, they were transferred out of Germany. And a lot of the assets left to pay all the subcontractors. So it was business as usual. And of course, this had to be handled through the transition from the Nazi Reich to the post-war Reich, or the post-war German government. Those then split up in two. My question would then be, well, is the Russians, the communists on that side, did they play ball underneath the current? You had an official, you had a Cold War, you had all these changes to the map that occurred, fine, absolutely. But did the intelligence communities underneath that were worked hand in hand with the bankers and with the businesses? Because the businesses would have to have an intelligence component to work with under the current to make sure there was a communication. Let's say if you were a Siemens, you had a branch in Czechoslovakia, a branch in Poland, you had a branch in Germany, in Austria, you had factories everywhere. And a lot of these individual factories kept running, and some of them were taken over, some of them were dismantled, and some of them just continued under the same ownership and was later sold. And all this had to be handled across now Cold War borders. So there must have to be entities. And I've seen in my travels and my research, I have seen quite and heard a lot of evidence that the various intelligence groups, East-West, were continuously communicating and talking with one another underneath the lines of the Cold War. Of course, yes, the CIA and other Western agencies were now at odds with the Soviet Union. You had the KGB. You had the infighting, but there's a lot can be said for the Cold War being partially manufactured. The ideologies of communism, Marxism, socialism, National Socialism were in some ways manufactured and shaped to balance each other out, to fight each other, which is what they have been doing ever since. You have all these proxy wars, which is basically a continuation of World War II. So World War II just continued in different forms with the bankers, with the financiers, with the businesses in different ways. I've been talking ever since. I just did a recap on German business continuation. Welcome back. Is you and the dog empty now?
Yes. After that discussion, I'm just sort of reeling because I had no idea that I'd be spending a Wednesday afternoon with MI6.
Sorry. I mean, would you like me to introduce you to a very nice IRA killer? I have a nice assassin for you to meet.
Boy, I tell you, I'd forgotten what that sort of and I met a lot over there when I was at Oxford. I'd just forgotten what that sort of connected Brit is like. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt what you were
No, I was just treading water till you got back with your big brain.
Okay, well, I'm here with what's left of the brain.
So, Eliza, we were talking about that there is hope, and like I said, I hope there is. I wish I could tell the next generation that there is some sort of sunshine coming over the horizon. I just can't see it.
Well, for one thing, we're dealing with a generation that has basically been raised after all of these events, and they don't remember what this country, or for that matter Europe, was like.
Yeah.
Say in
Not
the 60s. Yeah, it's not very long ago. Part of the problem is that in the last 2 centuries or so, the West has been captured by basically nothing but a philosophy of materialism. In other words, there's no God, there's no transcendence. Things like beauty, truth, goodness are just values. They're not anything transcendental.
Yeah.
That's part of the problem, and the other part of the problem is the elites, by and large, have bought into that philosophy.
Yeah.
But that is the problem. They have nothing else to offer.
The universal truth is no longer true.
Right.
The universal common sense is no longer.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, they have nothing else to offer, and I'm an optimistic pessimist in that I don't think that there's any way out of some sort of intense crack up of the West.
Yeah.
And that may be violent. I don't know. But on the other hand, the closer that the Hochklaus von Blauschwabs and that whole crowd get to their goal, the more inhuman it will become apparent to people. And inevitably, the lesson of history is that inevitably, no matter how well designed and how powerful the technocracy or the totalitarianism is, it always fails. It always collapses. And
but Joseph, don't you know that the future belongs to us?
Well, yeah, we've heard that before.
Yeah.
Tomorrow belongs to me. I remember that. I remember that song when Cabaret first came out, and it's really haunting when you go back and look at that movie, and to see where we are socially now.
Yeah,
because the parallels are very clear, and they're definitely there. I think what he said, just as before he signed off, I think is true. And what you said, we are watching all the necessary steps being put into place for a crack up.
Yeah. And that might be a good thing. I mean, it may be time, because if we break up, then that means they will lose a central control. And the central control, and that's what I don't understand, why you have young people. Well, I guess they don't really, I don't know if they understand or don't care. But central control of anything is bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's very simple. You don't want some bureaucrat somewhere behind a computer, like you have in the EU or Washington, the UN, calling the shots for your individual life, because we're all different.
Yeah.
And hear me now, we are all different, and thank God for that. Because if we were all the same, what a terrible world that would be.
Well,
but you can't have it would be very boring, yes. But the world you have now is a different implementation of the control of information. You have the good and the bad about the internet is you can put anything up there. The bad thing is you can put anything up there. And if you have control entities of press and media, as we have slowly seen implemented over these years, Hitler was smart. Already in the 20s, Hitler started buying newspapers.
Yes.
He knew how this game was going to be played. Control information, control media. And that's what we see now, a uniform control of media, information, and schools and education.
Oh yeah, I mean, if you look at the media now, it's any of the major propaganda media networks. That's what I call it, propaganda, because it's propaganda and it's entertainment. You know, it's Joseph Goebbels on steroids.
Oh yes, very.
And you know, people forget that what made Goebbels work as a propagandist, as opposed to what you saw coming out of the Soviet Union at the same time, was Goebbels would never conceal the truth. He would always garnish it in a context that made the truth palatable.
Yes.
And you know, he was a real genius in that respect. You know,
Germany
could be losing the war, and yet he could spin that in such a way that, yeah, we lost that battle, but you know, this is going on over here. You know?
I mean, you see the same thing today, where everything is literally going to hell.
Yeah.
Prices, inflation, crime, illegal invasion, all over the Western civilized world. Everything is literally, you can see it. You can see it with your own two lying eyes. On the streets, downtown, you can see the prices in the grocery store, and yet you have media that continues, or politicians continue to tell you how great things are going, and we're on track.
No.
And you wonder, like, do you not believe what you see? Critical thinking again.
Yeah, this is, you know, we are in a very, very bad state. And I think, quite frankly, Mr. Globaloney has a problem. Mr. Globaloney wants to centralize everything. However, at the same time, Mr. Globaloney has created a financial mess in the West that he cannot get out of. And the only way he can walk away from his financial obligations is to blow up the system. Well, you can't have a centralized system and blow it up at the same time. They're trying with the cryptocurrency nonsense, but the problem there is, as we've just seen, it is too easy for them to launder money to, you know, Joe Biden and Mitch McConnell and all of that stuff, you know.
Bahamas office?
Yeah, exactly. And this was a big wake-up call to people that think crypto is wonderful. No, this is rife with fraud, and it can be hacked. And you want to turn your pocketbook over to people that can do this? Oh, sorry.
I hope this was a blow. We're talking about FTX, a blow to the whole cashless society notion. And I want to ask you, and asking everyone out there who sees this, which actually quite a lot today, it was great. Do you trust your government?
In a word, no.
Do you trust any government at this point?
No.
Do you trust your media, the ones who gives you information?
Look, Tino. I'm somewhat to the right of Attila the Hun. Okay. All right. Just to lay all of my cultural and political cards out.
He was a centralist, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was a centralist. But I, you know, when I say that I would trust Xi Jinping more than the current Prime Minister of Great Britain or the current alleged President of the United States or France, I mean it.
Well, and that's what he means.
This is the problem in the West.
Yeah.
This is the problem. They have survived on a system of corruption. And I'll be very blunt. The system of this country was founded on corruption. Let's not forget that one of the big Federalists was Alexander Hamilton. Dig into his career and you've got Mr. Corruption walking the streets.
I will say the Constitution had some pretty darn good ideas.
It had some pretty darn good ideas, but one of the ideas that was not good, as the anti-federalists tried to point out at the time, unsuccessfully, was that this was a recipe for oligarchy, and look where we are.
Yep, and that's really where we are now.
And that's really where we are.
And I'm saying the last 2 years may And despite all the people who died needlessly and all the nonsense and chaos that has artificially been created because of the past 2 years of crisis, mostly a man-made crisis.
Yes,
I could, well, 100% a man-made crisis. Even if it was an accident, it was still a crisis of opportunity. And who's to let one of those go? It showed their cards. Now, two things came out of this. It has showed how easy it is to dominate and control entire countries' populations, even if it's by proxy of other peoples in the country.
Right.
It has also, I would like to think that it has taught me. I'm never going to just blindly listen and follow again, ever. I didn't do it then, honestly, but I'm certainly not going to do it now. I'm never going to listen or believe blindly to what they tell me again. The problem is, as we still see, there's a lot of people that are willing to jump into it again. That, on one hand, has emboldened the globalists, knowing that, well, hey, we can keep pushing. They're just going to say yes. On the other hand, it has opened their cards for us to see this is the tactic they're going to use in order to dominate and govern us all. Are you going to play along with it or not?
Well, the other thing that they've done is they've created a massive amount of pushback.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I think Mr. Global, my point here is there may be no way out of this without some sort of violent crack up in the West. That may be true. But by the same token, there is no way forward for Mr. Globalone to absolute victory or success. That is also true. His world is coming to and he may be successful for a while. I'm not saying that he won't be, but ultimately, no. The system they're trying to put into place is inhuman, and for that reason alone, because it is a species of unreality, it is for that reason alone it will collapse. But in the meantime, what you're seeing happen in this country, and I hope people are really cluing into this, is you're seeing states, forget about the governors in charge of those states. What you're seeing in this country are the deep states of the states, if I can use that expression. Planning for the future. They know a crack up is coming and they're planning accordingly. We've got bullion depositories in Texas and Utah. We've got specie constitutional money resolutions in South Carolina and Wyoming and South Dakota and on and on. So in other words, they know what's coming. And what they're doing is they're putting into place the practical steps for what happens when the swamp finally explodes or implodes. I personally think it's going to implode.
Yeah.
I call it the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact, meaning California, Oregon, Washington, Illinois, and that enclave from Pennsylvania up to Maine. To me, that's now the Warsaw Pact.
I mean, we are seeing a separation of peoples where the red states get redder, the blue states get bluer, and it's so. To me, trying to not be political, generally, as I always have sort of endeavored to try to not be, at least in public, is I see what's been happening the last 2 years can be described at the very best as outright fascism.
Yes.
The control and where the globalists are going, this is fascism. The control of the press, the use of the FBI and the justice system, whether you agree with whoever or not, this is fascism. This is exactly what fascism looks like. And fascism and Nazism, it's the same damn thing. Communism, it's the same thing. It just maybe they have a different T-shirt on. And that is what you have the powers it is fascism. And then you have the conservatives that's sitting on the other side and say, we just want to be free to run our businesses. And they are being blamed for being fascists, which is completely, to anybody who knows anything about history, completely asinine. It is upside down of reality. And you wonder how little have you learned in school or college to not see it is not fascism to say, I want to be free.
You cannot, this is the problem. You cannot study American history and get anything but the narrative.
True.
This is the problem. There is no in-depth dissection within American academia of the whole progressivist agenda that began with Woodrow Wilson. And let's remember what he gave us. He gave us the Federal Reserve and the income tax.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Woodrow.
Yes. Yes. And then FDR did not.
And then FDR, that was the second blow. And all of the agents of influence, quite literally, of the Soviet Union that he had in his government.
And then we're back to Johnson after Kennedy.
And then we're back to Johnson after Kennedy. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and a succession of non-entities, since Lyndon Johnson.
Yeah.
You basically had a post-coup government put into place in this country, and it doesn't matter if you're dealing with Richard Nixon or Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan.
Yeah.
All of them, without exception, have been forced to walk the line. And this is why Kennedy is so important, because you'll notice there are two official versions of the Kennedy assassination in this country. There's the Warren Report, and then there's the House Committee
1980.
In 1980 on assassinations. And the House Committee, the congressional version of the assassination is it was a conspiracy.
Yes.
We don't really know who did it, but it was a conspiracy.
There was a shotgun shot from the grassy knoll that may not have hit anything.
Right.
Official, yes.
But the executive branch version is still the official narrative, and that version is it was a lone nut. So in other words, you can tell who's in power in this country simply on the basis of whoever is in the White House talking about the Kennedy assassination.
Yeah.
Without exception, from Lyndon Baines Johnson up to and including Barack Obama, every occupant of the White House has towed the line with the Warren Report. The only one who was an occupant of the White House in recent history that raised questions about it was Donald Trump.
Yep. And
he was replaced with a coup d'etat.
Yeah.
So in other words, folks, wake up. This is not about Democrats. It's not about Republicans.
No.
It's about deep state and whether you want to have a fascist country or not. Yeah. And like it or not, fascists only understand one language. They only, and it ain't flowers, and it ain't ballots.
No. Stalin had that pegged long ago.
He had that pegged long ago.
And
a fight, in other words, is coming, like it or not. It's coming.
And sadly it is. And if you ever want to pose to the generation who screams and shouts that the people who just want individual freedom and small government are the fascists, well, they're also the people asking questions they're not allowed to talk about.
Right.
And if you want to know what fascism is when you are not allowed to have an open debate, Q&A, questions, answers about anything.
Right.
When you say, and if you start seeing how the amount of scientists and doctors that was shut down because they just wanted a debate about the vaccine or the global warming or so on and so forth. And if you're not allowed to have the open conversation, if you have nothing to hide, we have an open conversation. Ask me anything. If you shut down the conversation, it's because you do not want an open Q&A because you have something to hide. That is very simple. If you ban people and you take people's businesses away and you destroy them and you send the Justice Department out or FBI to raid their house and arrest their children, well, that is actually physically happening.
Yes.
Because you don't want them to ask questions.
Yes.
That is fascism. Yeah. Whether you like it or not, that is actually happening. In America, the land of the free and the brave, where we have political prisoners at this very minute who's not allowed due course. That's what's happening.
The idea that when I was a kid, it was the Soviet Union that had raids in the middle of the night from the KGB, and maybe you'd see a television news clip about it on Pravda or just before the Soviet television signed off. This was unheard of in this country. It was absolutely unheard of. And now it's normal, and people don't bat an eye.
And I'll tell you an example of how this is going to work. Having grown up in Europe, having lived in Denmark, with my mother paid 73% income tax at one point. You think that, oh well, he hired all these 87,000 more IRS inspectors. This is how you implement fascism. They all seem to be armed. All these armed entities of the federal government. This is how you dictate and control a population.
Yep.
First, you have the rules, you have the overregulations, you have the millions of different rules and enforcers of these rules with unlimited federal powers to arrest and impede and pick people up in the night. This is what the IRS does. In Europe, you have practically no individual freedom. It is so hard to start a business. You're taxed to death. The IRS literally comes to your place of business in Denmark if you want to start a new business. They have raids on the time at the airports where they pull people out going on vacation to run them to see if they owe any money, so they'll take their holiday money. They have roadblocks, the IRS in Denmark, to see what car you drive. You drive a foreign car, they may take it from you or your watch. And if you defy them, you will go to jail. This is how you control people. Because now, Joseph, if they come to your house and surround you with the FBI SWAT team because they say you've done anything, I will probably get pissed off and start a counter demonstration. If the IRS comes to your house and say, we think you owe us $1 million, we're going to take you away for tax evasion quietly in the night. They're going to litigate you to death and put you away for that. I'm going to go, okay, I don't want any part of that. Your neighbors are not going to go, well, they didn't see the SWAT team because it was IRS agents. Now they can come to you and you and you, and everyone's just going to stay quiet because nobody wants to be audited. Because now you have this gray, faceless eminence woman who will now come and take what you have without you having any recourse. And that's how you cow an entire population. You make examples out of some. And if you can raid a former president's home, and you can go to a pastor's home in front of his kids, well, then they could come for you if you speak too loud. And that's the problem where we are now. And that's why the red states are getting boosted.
People need to understand. People need to understand right now, talk like you and I are having is painting a great big target on us, you and on me.
Yeah.
Because people need to understand that talk like this from now on until this situation is rectified is putting your life at risk. And hey, I'm okay with it because I'll tell you what, I do not want to live in the world that Joe Biden and Klaus Schwab and George Soros and Antifa and Chuck Schumer and that whole ilk have planned, and Bill Gates. I don't want to live in their world. No.
And I absolutely agree with you. And it's easy for me to say when I have no family left for them to threaten. Well, you have to live long enough for the puppy dog, and then well, then we could do the Cash and Cassidy. We can storm out the Mexican at the bar. But it's sad and all we want is freedom, personal freedom. And I'll paint my face blue and white and stand up and scream for freedom because somebody has to. That's why I came to this country, because I wanted the personal freedom of creating a business, running it, and keeping.
Well, look, more and more people, there are more and more people that are standing up and saying the same thing in this country.
I know.
And that has them worried.
Yes.
Because you're dealing still in this country with an armed population. Yes. And like it or not, folks, the founding fathers didn't put in the right to keep and bear arms so that you could go hunting.
Well,
that ain't it. That ain't it.
Totalitarian government, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Tyrannical government, I think it said.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, it may be heading for a crack up. And the crack up may indeed be violent. Knowing the left, I doubt that they're willing to let anyone go peaceably.
Yes. Now, on a happier, more delightfully wonderful, cheerful note, since I have you, let's go back to the Nazis.
Okay, yeah.
I love your take. I mean, let's talk about something more jovial.
Let's talk about something more jovial. Yes, the Nazis.
Yes, at least we can wrap our heads around them. I love your take on Roswell and the German connection, if you will, because I agree with you.
Well, my problem with Roswell, I have two problems with Roswell. Number one, the idea that you can crash a weather balloon in the deserts of New Mexico and then have the chief intelligence officer of the only atomic bomb wing in the entire American Air Force at the time. In other words, the only bomber wing that knew how to deliver an atomic bomb to a target, to have the chief intelligence officer of that unit misidentify whatever wreckage he found as a weather balloon is a big heaping steaming crock of you know what. It's a big steaming it's a big steaming crock of horse pucky. So number one, Jesse Marcel, who was the major in charge of the intelligence unit at the 509th Bomb Wing, was not an idiot. He knew the difference between an aerial machine of some sort and a weather balloon. So that's number one. Number two, whatever crashed there in New Mexico sure got the Air Force's attention, because we had Nathan Twining, who is the general in charge of the Air Technical Intelligence Command. That's the command that deals with enemy equipment. Okay. He has to fly out to New Mexico and make his little tour. At the same time, we have all the German Nazis out in New Mexico who, according to some reports, are shown the wreckage and asked what they think about it. Now, stop, folks. Just stop right there. If those stories are true, why does the U.S. Air Force decide, oh, we need to show this to all these Nazis to see what they think?
Maybe it's a German weather balloon.
Is it a German weather balloon? Well, if so, then the Germans have some really sophisticated weather balloon technology.
It flew for 2 years and landed in Roswell.
Yeah, flies across Asia for 2 and the Pacific, and then lands right here. Okay, no. Then we get the extraterrestrial craft theory, and here's my problem with that. My problem with that, Tino, and I'm condensing into the Cliff Notes version here, folks. If you want to really know what I think about it, get my book. It's called Roswell and the Reich. Okay, it's on my website. You can order it there. And it's a 500-page book, and I call it the book that ufology loves to ignore. You know, they were selling it at the Roswell Museum until Stanton Friedman found out about it and then had them pull it, you know. But anyway, my problem with the extraterrestrial theory is that theory is based, if you examine the story as its proponents have told it, okay? If you examine the story as its proponents have told it, you'll discover that the evidence for it being extraterrestrial comes largely from the bodies that purportedly were found and autopsied.
Short and burnt.
And the problem there is that the story of the bodies doesn't really start to appear until Berlitz and Moore published their book in the late 1970s. So in other words, there is a lag of approximately 30 years between whatever it was that crashed, when the evidentiary body was largely the debris and what was reported about the debris. And then you get the bodies added to the story 30 years later, and the story flips and shifts.
Okay? So the story about the baby coffins and the mortician and all that is 30 years later.
It's about 30 years later, yes. It is not part of the original story. This is why I'm so frustrated at Roswell, because when you examine the story as in a chronological progression, you really get two different stories based on two different classes of evidence. There's a story that something weird crashed in the New Mexico desert, and it's either a flying saucer or it's a weather balloon. Okay. Now you'll notice that what's left out of this is, may it have been something Nazi? And here's my problem. Once you admit the hypothesis that the Nazis are down there in Argentina making all sorts of who knows what for Juan Perón, and they're making some pretty interesting stuff for General Perón, as it turns out. But once you admit that, then having something Nazi flying around New Mexico and then crashing is going to present your narrative with a bit of a problem, because your narrative has it that, hey, we cleaned these guys' clock 2 years ago and they're not even supposed to be around doing all this stuff. So we'd better come up with a really cool way of covering up what crashed here to make sure people don't look too closely. Because if people start looking too closely, then they're going to start asking, well, what are the Nazis doing flying around New Mexico in 1947? And where are they coming from? And what are they doing this for? And who's got the money to make all this? Okay. So you're going to start asking all sorts of inconvenient questions. That's my point.
So could this have been tests the Germans were doing in New Mexico, a part of one of the experimental crafts we brought back from the war?
Sure. But then why do you bring in the Germans to look at it?
Pick up your shit and take it back to base.
You already know whose it is. And
True.
And the second problem is, if you think it's German, then that would explain why you put your intelligence guy from the 509th Bomb Wing on it. But what it's not going to explain is why he starts thinking and talking to people like, oh, I haven't seen this stuff before. What is this? What's this memory stuff? You know?
Plus, it wasn't repatriated to the German scientists in New Mexico.
Right.
It was taken out of the state entirely.
It went to Fort Worth,
and
that's where they hauled Jesse Marcel and had him give that press conference. Oh, this was. Oh, I misidentified this. Oh, really?
Yeah.
You know, come on. Now, the real giveaway here is the document, and I want people to pay attention to this very carefully. The document is the Air Force Intelligence Collection Memorandum that Brigadier General Shulgin promulgated in September of 1947 after Roswell. This is the document that the ufology crowd loves to cite as proof of its extraterrestrial origin. The problem, Tino, is that this document exists in two versions.
Yep.
There is the version that there is no mention whatsoever of little bodies or interplanetary possibilities. All the memorandum lists is General Shulgin wants to know what the landing carriage of these craft are, where they come from, and by the way, where are the Horton brothers? Okay?
Yes.
With me? Well, yes. I'll tell you, I know where the Horton brothers are. Yes. They're in Argentina.
Yes.
Working for Juan Perón. Okay? Designing all sorts of interesting, very future-looking jet aircraft for the Argentine Air Force.
And if anybody doesn't know, the Horton brothers built the first real jet flying wing that looks surprisingly much like the B-2.
Which, incidentally, if you're not familiar with the story, Northrop Grumman built an entire life-size mock-up of the flying wing, of the Goethe flying, in 2003.
Yep.
And they painted it with paints that were, as close as
radar absorbent paint
and then they did a radar cross section on it and found that this dang thing was about 25% stealthy to the radar that it would have encountered at the time. So anyway, here's the problem with the Shulgin Memorandum. In the version that Ufology likes to cite, all of that original material is still there.
Yeah.
The references to the Horton brothers and so on and so forth. But little phrases have been added to the document to suggest that this thing was extraterrestrial. Well, here's my problem. Why, if you suspect that this is extraterrestrial, would you even bother wanting to find out about its landing gear, where it comes from on the Earth, and where the Horton brothers were? The whole story, in other words, makes no sense.
No, that's
you're either forced by the way they've set the story up to believe nothing crashed there at all and it was just a weather balloon, or you're forced to believe that it was something extraterrestrial and is coming from God knows where. There's no perfect middle ground here.
No.
Now, here's my other problem. In 1952, at the big UFO flap, that occurred over Washington, D.C., that nobody could ignore. Okay. There are two people in power at that time in 1952 when this happens. One of them is President Harry S. Truman. Okay. And Truman, being Truman, tells the Air Force, well, shoot him down. Whoever is up there flying these damn things around, shoot him down. Okay. Now, Tino, say what you will about Harry Truman. The guy is not going to start an interplanetary war or even risk it if he thinks for 1 minute that he's dealing with a bunch of little green men.
Yes.
That's my problem number one. Okay. Truman's shoot down order is a clear indication that he knows a lot more about what the Air Force thinks is flying around up there. And he's not even so reckless as to think it's even Soviet. Because if he's shooting down Soviets, he's risking a nuclear war.
Yes. And if there had been an alien crash in 47 with bodies and everything, he would know there's something you don't want to mess with.
You don't want to mess with it. Right. The other person that is in power at the time in 1952 and who would have been reading his Washington Post and his Life magazines is Senator Joseph R. McCarthy.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
Now, folks, if you really want an interesting read, I'm going to give a commercial here. If you want an interesting read on what McCarthy was really doing and why they really went after him from his own committee transcripts, don't read any of the liberal press. Read my book, McCarthy, Monmouth, and the Deep State, because I go into the transcripts, which, golly gosh, oh gee, looky here, were only declassified in 2003.
Wonder why.
Golly. Maybe it's the repeated references in those transcripts to personnel from Fort Monmouth going to New Mexico in July of 1947. And that date is mentioned not by Roy Cohn and not by the other members of the committee questioning the people from Monmouth. It's mentioned by Senator McCarthy himself.
Boy, and that's just interesting.
Ain't that a hill of beans? And you wonder why the U.S. Army contrived to get rid of him with the Eisenhower administration. Friends, what I'm telling you is he's getting close to the big secret, and that's the UFO. And by the way, just to really whet your appetite, he also mentions himself, Joe McCarthy, right there in the transcripts. He mentions a little thing called Blue Book.
Why has that got to do with the communists infiltrating Washington, I wonder?
Not a blessed thing. But he is, after all, chairman of the Government Operations Committee investigating security risks at Fort Monmouth. And oh, looky, what we just stumbled across. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, maybe can we dig him up because he had some good ideas. Maybe we should.
McCarthy? Listen. I grew up in South Dakota, Tino. And as a boy, the senior senator from South Dakota was Carl Mundt. And if you know anything about Carl Mundt, well, Carl Mundt was the actual chairman of the Army McCarthy hearings. And he was a close friend of Senator McCarthy. And Mundt was one of the few senators, along with Barry Goldwater and a couple of other people, that voted not to censure McCarthy. So when I grew up, Senator Mundt had all of these books that he would plant in the school and public libraries in eastern South Dakota. So I grew up going to the Sioux Falls Public Library and finding all these books about Senator McCarthy, and reading him. And in South Dakota at the time, he was not viewed, McCarthy, was not viewed as, the next worst thing since Hillary Clinton and Adolf Hitler. He was not viewed that way at all. So I grew up, not believing that narrative. And lo and behold, I found out later when I went to Oxford that his assistant counsel, Bobby Kennedy Sr.
Oh yes, that's right. That's right.
The Kennedy McCarthy connection is not very well known, but Bobby Kennedy Sr. went to McCarthy's funeral secretly.
That's right.
In Wisconsin. So, after they get rid of McCarthy, and I think there's definitely a possibility that the man was murdered, they give this enormous, elaborate funeral for him on the floor of the U.S. Senate. Okay, what's wrong with this picture? You either love him or you hate him,
Yes.
Why this funeral for the guy? I don't get it. Anyway. And if you really want to know something, dig into what Prescott Bush did with him.
With McCarthy?
Yeah.
But there's a link between wasn't there a link between some of the old McCarthy's old staffers up to President Trump? Was there not a? Thank you.
Yeah.
I seem to remember some communications going on here. Roy Cohn, was it?
Roy Cohn. Yeah. the original swamp creature, folks.
But what is Lenin? He said everything is connected to everything else.
Well, yeah, you can't tell me. Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn is, for crying out loud, he's the attorney for the Bronfmans, for crying out loud. You want a guy with some mob connections, this is it. And, he's McCarthy's chief counsel. And then he ends up being real chummy with Donald Trump. And the plain fact of the matter is, if you dig into it, you would not have Trump Tower at all in New York City if it were not for Roy Cohn. He's the guy that made that possible. So, yeah, do I think Trump is a deep stater? Yes, but just a very different faction from the other crowd.
So, well, isn't that always the choice? We have to choose between one or the other.
Yeah, well, that's the problem.
The question is, unless somebody and no one will be allowed to pave a third way out,
right?
Almost because, right. And no, again, we look at why all these. We always ask ourselves why all these idiots in politics everywhere. Because smart people don't want to get involved in that sort of nonsense.
Exactly.
At the very least, they'll get involved in big business or pharma or whatever and make millions and millions of dollars, and no one will know their name, and that'll be fine for them.
Genuinely smart people want to be decent people.
I certainly hope so.
I truly think that. I think that for rather deep metaphysical reasons. But
so we don't have any smart Marxists, is what you're saying.
You will never have completely rational politicians, because politics is all about corruption. Corruption of that nature is by nature evil. And evil always, always, always is fundamentally irrational.
Yes. I mean, we are as close to a feudal system as we have been in hundreds of years. And I think everybody's sitting around waiting for a Braveheart. And I'm afraid that several will begin to appear, polarizing things even more. And that's where you're going to spark off whatever is going to happen. I can only hope that at the end of that, there'll be some clean air for the kids to enjoy, metaphorically speaking.
I agree. I'm very afraid of a demagogue stepping onto the scene.
Yeah, I think they'll find that for all the faults and flaws that they have accused Trump of having, and the ones he does have, the guy that he's the first of a line of people who will the first disruptor.
Yeah.
Trump is the first disruptor of the system, something we desperately needed, and Europe desperately needs, but they killed Hyder, so that didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's what comes after, because now they've seen how the system will go after a disruptor. That means the next disruptor is going to be more ruthless in his pursuit of literally giving us freedom, or his agenda, which means the third and the fourth one is going to start becoming really bad. And there's enough on the left that's willing to do all the crazy things. They have no shortage of nut jobs. Now, when we have the opposing on a conservative or a right, then it will have to happen.
Yeah.
It's just historically impossible for it not to.
Yeah.
And whoever's going to put name on that, they will look back on Trump and go like, yeah, he wasn't that bad. He didn't start any wars. Gee.
Yeah. Yeah. All he did was, make a few obnoxious tweets. I'm worried about the same thing. I'm worried about the disruptor. I always go back and tell people to go back to Isaac Asimov's Foundation trilogy. Yeah. Because what you're dealing with in the trilogy is basically a technocratic civilization.
Yeah.
That is highly centralized. And because it has reached such a pitch of technocratic competence, the people running it begin to forget how to do simple things like fix an elevator or fix the air conditioning. And then all of a sudden society starts to break down.
Yes.
And the people that know how to do these things without the aid of the computers and the robots, they're the ones that end up in the positions of real power. That's what we're facing now.
I mean, we've gotten to the point where there's so many misnomers in society, in Western civilization now, that we need to change. One being everybody needs to go to college. Absolutely not everybody needs to go to college. Far more people need to go to a technical college and learn how to build and weld and create. You can't find enough builders. You can't find people who are technically skilled. And who's going to build the robots? And the universal income idea, sit at home and do nothing. Well, somebody has to harvest the field. Somebody has to repair the machinery. Unless you're going to leave that to robots as well. It's a slippery slope, and it's not going to work. During the Depression, I always use them present. During the Great Depression, you could cook, she can sew, he can harvest, I can fix your shoes, he can repair your engine. You can come together as a society and survive because everybody brings a skill to it. Today, if there's a Great Depression, nobody can do anything of the younger generation. All these people coming out of colleges can't open a can of tuna. How are they going to fix the cars, the machines?
They don't even know what bathroom they're supposed to use. It's literally that bad. And the thing that has happened as a consequence of it, my academic background is in what you would call the liberal arts. Well, what I notice is that you no longer have people in those fields of study that are even capable of spotting a narrative. In other words, the propaganda begins now in the colleges, particularly in disciplines like history or literature or what have you. You will not get a real genuine graduate academic study of historiography anymore.
And I love the book you wrote on that. I don't know if I ever told you, but the book you wrote on education.
Oh, Rotten to the Common Core.
Yeah, I actually I sent that to the previous administration.
Oh, you did.
I did. No wonder the IRS called me the other day and asked for my taxes for 2,000 years. The FBI called. They said I started the Bay of Pigs invasion. Struckmann,
it was your fault, Tino. Now we know who was behind this.
Well, I thought somebody needed some common sense, so I figured, hey, read this, take a look at it. You may learn something.
At this point, I don't think the American Academy it's beyond the point of no return. I don't think it's fixable.
No,
I don't think the institutions of the system are fixable within the system.
Not as long as all the statues of Marx keep sitting outside the professor's offices. No.
Well, that's a problem. Yes.
Yes.
But even Marx, if you were studying philosophy right now in graduate school, I doubt you would even get a presentation of Marx based on primary sources. What you would get is someone's interpretation of Marx.
Cliff notes.
Yeah. And this was my problem as a professor, was that I was dealing with textbooks that contained no texts.
That's a problem.
To me,
we have history books that contain no history. So I mean,
I have a philosophy of the Middle Ages textbook right on the shelf, right across from me. I'm looking at it right now. And I used to use that when I was teaching medieval philosophy because it was a textbook. It was a textbook of texts from Averroes and Ibicena and Aquinas and Albertus Magnus and so on and so forth. And you sat down and you read these people.
Oh, dude, who heard such a thing?
And that was the reaction of the education majors that I had in that class. They were blonde and stupid. Let me repeat that. They were blonde and stupid. And yes, I'm being a profiler and patriarchal and all of that stuff because that's what they were. And the rest of the class kept looking at these two. Like, are you guys for real? Are you that dumb? Tino, they were that dumb.
But were they cute at least?
I gave in one year. I don't know if I've told you this story. I gave in one year and relented to my students. And I gave them a multiple choice exam.
Oy.
Yeah. Well, actually, I gave in twice. But on the first one, the very first question, this was in modern European history. The very first question said, name 5 provisions of the Treaty of Versailles, Versailles, period. And the student writes a bunch of gobbledygook that the Treaty of Versailles, Versigh.
Well, it's not like they had it for reference.
I spell it in the question, and they can't even spell it right. I was so mad after that exam. I copied that exam and sent it to the governor of the state I was teaching in and said, "You've got a problem. And the problem is you've got a bunch of teachers in your certification schools getting their educational certificates teaching this garbage and letting them get away with it."
Yeah.
My second multiple choice exam was one question with 26 different answers. And A through Z. And each answer was phrased just a little bit differently from the others. You made them
think.
And did I catch it? And there was only, and listen, I handed the exams back. And of course, there were moans and tears of dejection and all of this, none of which moved me in the slightest. And I was a Professor Kingseal. If you're familiar with the old TV series Paper Chase, I was that guy. Okay. But anyway, one student says, Dr. Farrell, can I see you after class? I said, sure. So after class, this student gets me out into the hall and he says, I have a problem. And I said, yes, what's the problem? And this was the student that I held the paper back. I didn't hand it out. He says, well, you'll probably notice I didn't answer the question. I said, yes, I noticed that. He said, well, I couldn't answer the question because none of the answers were correct. And I handed his paper to him and I said, congratulations, you get the A.
Really?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Ooh, that takes so much thinking on the part of the student to actually have enough critical skills. It's awesome.
Yeah, and not to fill in with his number 2 lead pencil, the little oval.
Yeah.
Like a trained Pavlov's dog.
Yes. Yes.
That's the problem. That's the problem right there.
That is the problem.
That is the problem.
We are, and I see it all around. You don't teach people to think or question. You just teach them to follow. And then you keep them distracted constantly.
Who killed John F. Kennedy? A, B, C, D, Lee Harvey Oswald, E, none of the above. How do you answer that? Or who came up with the formula E equals MC squared? A, B, C, D. And the M is written. Oops, let me show you this. The M is written with a small m. That's not Einstein's formula.
No.
It's a capital M.
Yes.
Why? Most physicists don't even know. Why did Einstein write the formula capital E equals capital M little c squared? Why did he write it that way? There's a reason.
Well, it's not like he took it by chance.
Well, exactly. But again, if we're following the standardized test thing, there's no thought involved. You're just told to regurgitate what the quote correct answer is, never question. And that to me is the problem with American education. Those test scores that they keep bragging or moaning about, oh, they're up, they're down. No, it's the test itself that needs to go.
Yes. Agreed. I remember some 10 years ago, there was 135,000 high school students in California that had not earned their high school diploma. And they all protested because they thought that was unfair. They couldn't pass the high school test. It was unfair. I don't know if they got one or whatever that is.
And it may have been unfair because what do these tests do? Well, these tests ultimately punish the person who knows better than the test compiler.
Yeah. And the test will teach you to remember something for 15 minutes in a short one-line answer. You don't write the answers. You don't write. I mean, even when I went to school, I had to write out
the
explanation. You write the answer. I don't remember any test in college, university, high school that was multiple choice.
Right.
Obviously. Right. Which forced me to improve my handwriting.
And writing also improves your reasoning ability.
Yes. Reading books, not watching 5-minute videos.
Right.
Something that you and I are not capable of making anyway. 5-minute
videos. Tino, I cannot watch videos for information.
I know.
Because and I'm not trying to be a braggart here, but in most videos that I would be interested in watching for subject matter, I already know the information they're going to present. And probably, usually in many cases, no more information, with few exceptions.
Yes.
My problem is that I see, I go over to a friend's place and they're sitting here doing this while they're pretending to watch a movie on television. They're doing this. And they're not watching the movie. So the other thing that happens is we forget how to communicate with each other and to read each other. And it's no wonder the society is breaking down. And it's going to get worse before it gets better.
I mean, I think I have, one date every year just to prove that it can't be done. And I think I screwed up the last one by insisting we both leave our phones in the cars.
Oh, shame on you.
I know. I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah, you take someone out for a nice dinner and they're doing this.
Yes, and but this girl, she was clever. She left her phone in the car, but she had an iWatch, so now she's texting on her bloody other watch the whole day. And then she was like, "Why didn't you call me? Like, you don't even remember what?" Like,
oh, jeez. Yeah.
It's like, you said no phone. That's yeah, okay. I guess I did. I did not know I needed a qualifier.
No phone or electronic communications device of any sort will be tolerated on this date. If you are in agreement with these terms, and I mean, it's getting ridiculous.
I mean, on my last dating profile, I put down no drug addicts or mental patients, please. I mean, I live in Los Angeles. That is sort of a very valid concern.
Please, yes, I know.
I mean, do I need to drop you off in the hospital somewhere on the way back?
On the way to get your meds.
I see you wearing a medical bracelet. I mean, I'm not asking much, am I? I mean,
what time do you have to be back at the dormitory wing of your house? Yeah, I know. I just, I have my puppy, I have my books, I have Bruno, and I just live my own little cloistered cultural existence here.
I mean, I will up my 2 dates, my date a year to twice a year just to prove that it can. I mean,
it can be done.
It can.
We are up to 2 dates a year now.
I'm 2 divorces down. Give me a break here.
There are still women out there who know the difference between a phone and a conversation. Yeah, I know it's absurd,
But I mean, I guess I have to qualify that I'm a terrible white misogynist. I only actually date genetic women. I'm sorry. I'm cornering myself out of the market there. I'm sorry,
but I only date genetic women.
Persons capable of childbearing. Is that too much to ask? I mean, or if they have a golden retriever or something. That's
listen. Okay. These days, I don't blame you. Yeah.
This is where you need the multiple choice crossover. Like,
this is where you need to do some very serious profiling.
Before this day start, can we just do this DNA testing?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. No, it's getting absurd.
It really is, and you would think that more people. From what I understand, the women's liberation movement from the 60s, 70s have understood that all of a sudden they have been flying in the wrong. Nobody stands up for them except these dull conservative men. Who would have thought? I was once accused of was discriminating, but that I suggested that chivalry wasn't dead. I have started an entire book with listing the whole points of chivalry, and it's funny how we have what happens in colleges are it's terrifying.
It's insanity.
It really is. And I wonder if you can see it.
It's to the point now. There is a professor here in this state at this state that I live in. At one of the state's universities,
mm-hmm.
Who is a professor of mathematics. Okay, mathematics.
Yeah.
That made national news when he came out and opined that mathematics was too white and too racist and needed to have. And
sorry?
Doubtless it's because of all of those Greek symbols in mathematics. The Greeks were, after all, white. I just, the mind boggles at how nonsensical this
I mean,
is.
and it's what's interesting is, and you are probably one of the few people today who will not remember this, but you will know when they talk about children sexual reassignment surgeries and hormone suppression for children. They say, oh, well, they have all these studies that, oh, that's fine, it's fine, it's better psychologically. You remember what happened to the castradas?
Oh, yes.
We have clear data dating back 100-some years to what happened. Well, back in the day, they would castrate the male choirs before they reached puberty. And all these young boys had horrible deformities, horrible diseases. This is verifiable. That's why they stopped doing it, because they grew up incredibly unhealthy with all sorts of terrible problems. I said sexuality is something you figure out when you get old enough to make the determination yourself, and whatever you choose to be is whatever you choose to be. But you cannot do this to 6, 7, 10-year-olds, because we have the data from back in the day, if we bothered studying history, of how these people suffered, which is terrible.
It is. It is.
But that's we really
they don't want to. This is the other problem of cutting people off from that culture, because you know a lot of these things have been tried before. And you know, when you cut yourself off from the history or the tradition of a culture, good and bad, you're bound to repeat the bad mistakes. And you know, here we are. I just, you know, it's not going to get any better. No, and the only thing that making the hard sciences woke is going to do is it's going to drive the hard sciences out of our universities and overseas. That's the only thing it's going to do.
Yes, because funny enough, the people overseas, the Chinese, the Russians, the traditional enemies, they don't seem to have the issues we're having.
No,
they don't seem to believe in this nonsense that if you're a TikTok person, which I know you're not and I'm not. However, if you are a TikTok person in the West, there's a Western TikTok full of this nonsense. But the Chinese TikTok is very much full of wholesome values, animals, things that are productive for society to see and entertainment. It's not the nonsense they see. They know it's wrong. They have no problem pushing it on us, but they know it's wrong. And if you, from a point of psychology, take young people and keep impressing upon them that who they are physically is wrong, if they are not who they look, if it's okay for you to not be who you see in the mirror.
Tino, my problem with it is deeper than that. My problem with it is that you are so sexualizing people at a young age that you are convincing them that their identity is tied up with their sexuality, and it is not. It is influenced by it. It is part of it, but it's not the whole. And what we're doing is something very dangerous to me. Is I think we're trying to convince a young boy or a young girl that their entire existence is tied up with their sexuality, with their sex. And you know, what we're doing is we're going to be creating people who are walking around 24/7 thinking of nothing but their libido. And
or you're going to have serious psychological issues, and you see suicides amongst teenagers are exponentially through the roof over the past couple of years. And you can't just blame that on the pandemic. This whole sexualization of children and then the suppression of who they are, or the and I'm going to say, if you want to go my MK Ultra and you want to say, well, this is how you brainwash an entire generation through mass propaganda into thinking there's something they're not, while they're looking and feeling their own genetics, they will turn schizophrenic. They will lose their mind, which is what we're seeing from the point of psychology, which is terrifying.
Yeah, it is.
It's not making dating any easier, I'm telling you.
No, I know. Anyway, my friend, I've got my little dog Shiloh. She's
puppy dog.
She's just right up here in my face. I don't know why. What's the matter?
Should be.
What's the matter, little girl? You go lay down.
I am now bored. Daddy wants to go for a walk.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks for having me. It
was damn good seeing you. Send me a link to that part of your website for your book. I'll put it on my website. Okay. I'll also put Michael's link on my website for those of you. And there's a new members area on Lost Battlefield, so you can actually join Lost Battlefield I will also send you a link to my link of Lost Battlefields, because all of the research papers I have done, all the photos, all the maps, everything is now on Lost Battlefields in the members area. So you can just open the PDFs and download anything you want. There's also a blanket invitation to the 3,000 Bundesarchive files, non-sorted, that you can download, because research for me is about sharing it with everybody. But you have to join damn it.
Okay. All right. I will try and remember.
You don't have you don't have to join, because you get the free password. Everyone else has to join.
All right. Thanks for having me, Tino.
Thank you, my friend. I will see you soon, I hope.
All right. Yeah.
Bye, puppy dogs.
Yeah. Bye-bye.